Welcome to Eerie Shadow. Love can be beautiful, but what happens when it turns into something darker? When the past lingers like a haunting whisper and the memories of an ex resurface in unexpected ways, the line between love and horror blurs. In tonight's stories, we dive deep into the eerie, unsettling side of relationships that didn't last, where the echoes of love turn into nightmares. With every note of relaxing music, you'll drift into a world where heartbreak and fear intertwine, leaving you questioning what's real and what's just in your mind. Sit back, relax, and let the chilling tale unfold. I had never been good at letting go. It's a flaw, I know. But after everything that happened with Eva, blocking her on all social media felt like the only way forward. The decision weighed on me, heavier than I expected. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling, as if the phone could sense the gravity of what I was about to do. The finality of it lingered in the air like the moment before a storm. When I finally tapped the block button, a strange emptiness settled over me. I erased everything: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, gone. Every text, every picture, every trace of her presence in my life was systematically deleted, as if purging the memories would cleanse my heart. I told myself it was necessary. Eva had become toxic, and I needed to heal. But blocking her didn't make her disappear. Eva and I had met in college, in one of those chance encounters that felt orchestrated by fate. I was sitting under a tree with my nose buried in a book when she plopped down beside me, uninvited but welcome. Her laugh was contagious and her presence magnetic. We clicked instantly: late-night talks, spontaneous road trips, inside jokes that only we understood. But love, as it often does, turned sour. Arguments grew sharper, accusations more frequent. Trust eroded, leaving only resentment. By the time I decided to block her, we had become strangers who knew each other's darkest secrets. For a while, things were quiet. I went about my daily life, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Work-from-home days blurred together, punctuated only by the occasional jog through the empty streets of my neighborhood. I didn't expect to feel whole, but I thought I'd at least feel settled. Then the messages started. First, they seemed like nothing, harmless spam from accounts with random usernames and no posts. The first message was short and strange. "You can't escape me." I frowned at the screen, dismissing it as a glitch or a bot. My heart gave a nervous flutter, but I rationalized it away. Eva was gone, and this was just a coincidence. But then the messages kept coming. They were cryptic, unsettling. Sometimes it was a string of meaningless numbers. Other times it was a riddle. "The door is always open. You left your favorite shirt behind. I'll make sure you don't forget." My stomach knotted with unease. I reported the accounts, but they vanished as quickly as they appeared. New ones sprang up in their place, each message more personal than the last. What disturbed me most was how they referenced things only Eva would know: inside jokes, intimate conversations we'd shared during quiet nights, details I had never posted online. One evening, I confided in my best friend, Mark, over a video call. "Dude, I'm telling you it's her. It has to be," I said, running a hand through my hair. Mark's brow furrowed. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just some weird coincidence." "No, the things these accounts are saying, it's stuff only she would know. It's freaking me out." He sighed. "Look, maybe you should change your number, block everything again, or better yet, take a break from social media altogether." "I already did that," I muttered. "It's not enough." Mark's face softened. "Hey, you're not crazy, just be careful, okay?" One Friday night, everything came to a head. I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, a movie playing on the TV in a vain attempt to distract myself. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, vibrating against the glass. My pulse quickened. Reluctantly, I picked it up. Another message. "I'm still here. You know where to find me." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. My breath came shallow and fast. The words felt like a whisper in my ear, intimate and invasive. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind. I threw the phone down and it slid across the floor, coming to rest against the wall with a dull thud. My chest heaved as I fought to steady my breathing. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping at my front door. The kind of knock that suggested patience, yet carried an unsettling insistence. Tap, 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 my breath caught in my throat. My body went rigid. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing in. Tap, tap, tap. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, desperate for some sense of control. As I lifted it, the screen lit up with a new notification. A photo. It was of me, sitting on my couch in the exact position I had been just moments ago. My blood turned to ice. How was this possible? My mind raced, grasping for any rational explanation, but none came. The message followed. "I'm here." Terror gripped me. I turned toward the door, heart hammering in my chest. The handle began to turn, the metallic click echoing through the room. I stumbled back, eyes wide with fear, as the door creaked open. There was nothing there. Only darkness stretched beyond the threshold. The hallway was empty, silent, but on the floor just inside the door lay a piece of fabric, my favorite shirt, the one I had worn when Eva and I first met. The faded color and soft fabric were unmistakable. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen that shirt in months. How was it here now? I crouched down, fingers trembling as I reached for it. The fabric felt real, tangible, a cruel reminder of a past I had tried to forget. My phone buzzed again. "You left it behind, now you can't forget." A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever this was unraveling around me. Grabbing my keys, I bolted through the door and into the night. The cold air stung my skin as I raced down the stairs of my apartment building. My breaths came in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to be anywhere but there. As I reached the lobby, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass door. Eva. She stood at the end of the hallway, her eyes fixed on me. Her lips curled into an eerie smile, one that sent chills down my spine. But when I blinked, she was gone. I stumbled outside, my mind reeling. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. The world felt distorted, surreal. Was I losing my mind? Or was something darker at play? I didn't have answers, only a gnawing certainty that Eva was still here, lingering in the spaces I couldn't see. And I didn't know how much longer I could run from her. I never expected to hear from Jessica again. The breakup had been brutal, the kind that leaves marks you can't easily forget. Our relationship had been a whirlwind of passion and arguments, promises that shattered like glass. It took months for me to reclaim my life, to feel like myself again. I thought I was past it. That is, until the package arrived. It was a cold, dreary evening when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I went to answer anyway. Standing on the porch was a delivery man holding a medium-sized box. The label had no return address, just my name, written in an elegant, looping script. I frowned, wondering who could possibly have sent it. The man handed me the box without a word and walked away, leaving only the echo of his footsteps on the pavement. As I closed the door behind me, I inspected the package. There was something unsettling about it. The weight of it, the feel of it, like it held more than just cardboard and tape. I tore the tape away slowly, my fingers trembling. Inside was an old leather-bound journal, its cover worn and weathered as though it had been kept hidden for years. The pages inside were yellowed, the ink faded in places but still legible. My heart sank when I saw the first few words scrawled on the inside cover. "For the man who still doesn't know the truth." I hesitated, a cold shiver running down my spine. I knew that handwriting. It was Jessica's. I should have thrown it away then. I should have just walked away and never looked back. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I flipped the pages, and as I did, the memories came rushing back. Each page was a diary of our life together. Dates, places, arguments, and shared moments, everything was documented in meticulous detail. The first date we went on, the time we got lost on a hike and ended up staying out in the woods for hours. The times we laughed until we couldn't breathe, the times we yelled until our voices were hoarse. It was all there. But then something strange happened. As I flipped further into the journal, the entries began to contain details that I had never shared with Jessica. The time I'd spilled coffee on my shirt at work, a detail I had only told my best friend. The night I had nightmares about losing her, something I never told anyone. The small moments that only I knew, and yet they were written on these pages. How did she know these things? I felt a chill creep up my spine. My hand trembled as I turned to the next page. "The night you left me, I heard you in the hallway. I heard you crying, even though you never let me see it." The words made my stomach churn. That night I had left her, saying I needed space, but I hadn't known she had been listening. I had thought I was alone. I kept reading, even though I wanted to stop. Each new entry revealed more and more things she could never have known unless she had been watching me, observing me from afar, long after we had broken up. I know you still think about me, don't you? You hear my voice in the dark, you feel my touch when you close your eyes. The words were becoming unsettling, almost sinister. It wasn't just a journal anymore, it was a message from beyond the end of our relationship. I slammed the book shut, my pulse racing. My apartment suddenly felt too small, like the walls were closing in. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone else had been sending me these journals, playing some sick game, but it didn't feel like a game. It felt like something more, something I couldn't explain. I spent the next few days and a daze, unable to focus. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's face, her smile, her tears. I could almost hear her voice, faint but unmistakable. And then the phone calls started. They came late at night, always from a blocked number. When I picked up, no one spoke, just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. It felt like Jessica was there, lurking in the silence, waiting for me to speak. I tried to ignore it, but one night, the call came while I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. I grabbed the phone, desperate for some kind of answer. "Hello," I whispered into the dark. "You don't understand, do you?" Her voice came through the line, soft and distant, but unmistakable. "You still don't understand why I couldn't let you go." I froze, the air around me thick with tension. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I'm not hearing this," I muttered, but the voice continued. "I told you I would never leave you, but I had to leave, did I?" The line went dead. The next day, I found another journal on my doorstep, identical to the first one. I opened it, and there, in Jessica's handwriting, were the words I had feared the most. "I've been with you all this time, even after you left me. I'm not gone, not really. I'm a part of you now, just like you're a part of me." My hands shook as I read the words again. My throat went dry. This wasn't just about a breakup anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. It was as if Jessica's presence had never really left me. Like she had threaded herself into every moment of my life, even after we parted ways. I heard it, then footsteps, soft and slow, from the hallway outside my apartment. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. The journals were still coming, each new one revealing more intimate, private details, things only I knew. And as they arrived, I could feel her presence growing stronger, like she was closing in on me. I could almost hear her whispering my name, and I knew, deep down, that I would never truly escape her. It started with the doorbell. I had just returned from work, my legs sore from the long commute, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. The apartment was unusually quiet for a Thursday. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, an odd comfort. But when I heard the knock, no, the bell, it was different. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was. "Lucas!" I couldn't believe it. It had been 6 months. 6 months since he'd left me, and here he was, standing in the doorway like nothing had changed. His familiar brown eyes, his tousled dark hair. He was even wearing the same jacket from when we'd first met, the one I had loved. But that's not what stopped me from speaking for a moment. It was the way he looked at me, like he'd just returned from a short trip and I should be happy to see him. No questions asked. He was grinning like we had just seen each other yesterday. "Hey baby, what's for dinner?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his hands brushing past me as if the space between us had been empty all along. My mind was reeling, my pulse raced. I stood frozen at the door for a moment, trying to make sense of what was happening. I had broken up with him, he'd left me. He didn't even want to be with me. So why was he here? "Lucas, what are you doing here? You!" I swallowed hard, trying to collect my thoughts. "You left. You broke up with me." He paused for a moment, confusion flashing across his face. Then he laughed, his deep voice echoing in the empty apartment. "I don't know what you're talking about, baby. What's this about breaking up? Come on, don't be like that." His tone was calm, affectionate, as if we were still a couple. and for a moment I doubted myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had misunderstood something. No, I couldn't have. I remember that night too clearly. The anger, the shouting, him leaving. "Wait," I said, panic creeping into my chest. "The others, they didn't say anything." He raised an eyebrow, glancing at me with confusion. "What others?" I stepped back, my heart pounding in my ears. My mind scrambled, trying to piece together the disjointed events. Had I lost my mind? Was I dreaming? Suddenly, I wasn't so sure anymore. The past felt blurry. Lucas's presence was like a fog, clouding my memories, making them feel distant, wrong. "I'm serious," I said, my voice trembling. You didn't leave. You didn't break up with me." Lucas blinked at me, but there was no recognition in his eyes, no hesitation in his voice when he spoke again. "Come on, baby, stop joking around. You've been under stress lately. Let's just sit down, have dinner, and forget all of that. I'm back now. That's all that matters." It was like the world was bending around me. I couldn't trust my own mind, but I knew something was off. He was different, yet the same. The words he said them with a calmness that didn't fit the situation. There was no panic, no concern. Then the strange sensation hit me. Something was wrong in the apartment. The smell of coffee was gone, replaced by the faint scent of roses, his favorite. I looked around the living room and realized with horror that everything in the apartment was exactly the way it had been months ago. The books stacked by the window. The framed picture of us from our trip to the beach, before everything had gone wrong. It couldn't be real. None of it made sense. I pulled myself together and glanced at him, trying to steady my breath. "This isn't happening," I whispered. "This can't be happening." But Lucas only smiled, as though my reaction was the most normal thing in the world. He walked over to the kitchen, humming to himself. I stood frozen, trying to piece together everything that was happening. But the more I thought about it, the more the events felt like they were fading, slipping through my fingers. I stepped closer to him. "Lucas, you're not real. This isn't happening. You're not here." His smile faltered for a moment, but the uncertainty in his eyes quickly vanished. He grabbed a bottle of wine from the counter and turned back toward me as if I hadn't said a thing. "You're just tired, babe. You'll feel better after dinner." I stumbled back, trying to clear my thoughts. He couldn't be here. It was impossible. The last time I had seen him, he'd told me that he didn't love me anymore. I had cried, pleaded, but it hadn't mattered. But here he was, the same man, the same face, and I couldn't understand how it was happening. Suddenly, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The apartment wasn't just frozen in time. It was stuck in time. The walls felt suffocating, as if the seconds were stretching, becoming longer and longer. The seconds felt like minutes, hours, and days, all at once. "You don't remember," I whispered to myself, more to myself than to him. I couldn't look away from his face, the sickening realization washing over me. The past was blurring and distorting. My memories felt like pieces of glass being shattered, only to be reassembled in the wrong way. "Remember what?" Lucas asked, turning around with a puzzled look. I swallowed hard. "No one else remembers you, Lucas. No one remembers us. It's just me." His eyes narrowed, his gaze cold and distant now. "You're talking nonsense, Emily. I'm right here." But he couldn't be. The reality I knew was slipping away. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if something far darker was happening. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. It was locked. My breath quickened and my pulse raced as I scrambled to unlock it. I felt trapped, suffocated. I had to get out. I had to escape. But as I turned back, there he was again. Lucas. Standing behind me in the doorway, as if the room had never changed. The same smile on his face, the same laughter in his eyes. "It's all going to be okay," he said, his voice eerily calm. I gasped as the room began to warp around me, the walls stretching in unnatural ways, the light flickering in and out. The world was twisting. Time was stretching. I was no longer sure where yesterday ended and today began. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if it had ever really ended at all. The door locked behind me with a final click, and I was trapped. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden, and some secrets find their way into your life, no matter how desperately you try to escape them. That night, I wasn't searching for anything. I wasn't looking for answers or closure or even a distraction. It was just supposed to be another rainy night, a night like any other, with the soft tap of raindrops against my window and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my pacing feet. Nothing special, nothing sinister, but the truth doesn't wait for an invitation. It has a way of slipping into the most ordinary moments, unbidden, like an unwelcome guest who arrives with a message you're never prepared to hear. It started with a box I found in the back of my closet. The kind of box you forget about, shoved in a forgotten corner under piles of old clothes, hidden away behind memories you don't know whether to cherish or discard. You know the type, filled with things you thought you'd gotten rid of, old photographs, notes, trinkets. Things you thought you'd forgotten, except this box wasn't mine. It was Ronnie's. Ronnie was my everything for 3 years, my person. The one who made me believe in love in forever. He was kind, funny, smart, someone who could make even the darkest days feel lighter. The kind of guy who made you think that maybe love was something solid, something you could hold on to, something unchanging. Until it wasn't. When the lies started unraveling, so did we. Accusations. Silent fights that lingered too long, unspoken words that festered. Tears that fell, promises that broke like glass. I remember the last time we spoke, his voice strained, tired. He said he needed a fresh start. And then, just like that, he left. We broke up, and I thought that was it. I thought I'd never see him again, but I was wrong. 2 months later, I got the call. Ronnie had died in a car accident. It did not feel real. It could not feel real. My world tilted on its axis, and I could not catch my breath. I had never even said goodbye, so finding his diary that night did not make any sense. It had been years since we'd talked, since we'd even seen each other. He'd moved across the country. I had moved on with my life. There was no reason for me to be holding this diary in my hands now. The cover was worn, the edges frayed as though it had been tucked away for years, forgotten. My fingers shook as I turned the first few pages, expecting it to be nothing more than memories of us. But it wasn't just that. The first entries were exactly what I expected. Nostalgic ramblings about our time together, places we'd visited, inside jokes that only we understood. All the things we used to talk about when we were happy before everything fell apart. But then the entries started changing. They weren't about the past anymore. They were about me, my life. Now, things I had never told anyone. January 12th, it read. She will get a promotion at work. She will celebrate with wine, but it won't taste as sweet as she hopes. That was last week. And it was true. I had gotten a promotion. I had celebrated. And I had poured myself a glass of wine, but I could not shake the feeling that something was missing, something I could not quite grasp. I thought it was just a coincidence. But as I kept reading, the diary began to whisper truths, too many things that had no business being in a book that belonged to a dead man. February 3rd, it read. She will find this diary and it will ruin her. That was today. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding in my chest. This could not be real. Ronnie was dead. He could not have written this, but then who did? I could not stop myself. Desperation clawed at me. I flipped to the last page. The ink was fresh, smudged, as if it had been written just moments ago. Tonight, it read. He will come back. A shiver ran down my spine, and the air in my apartment seemed to grow colder. The lights flickered overhead, a soft hum that filled the room before plunging everything into darkness. My heartbeat quickened as the tension in the air thickened, oppressive, unbearable. And then I heard it, a knock. Slow, methodical, deliberate. It came from the door. My chest tightened. I froze. My body refused to move, my feet like they were cemented to the floor. I knew it could not be him. I knew it. Ronnie was dead. He was gone. But still, I found myself moving toward the door, almost as if my legs were pulling me there against my will. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. No one was there. But the scent of his cologne lingered in the air. I slammed the door shut, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to convince myself that it was a trick, that my mind was playing games with me, but the lingering scent of his cologne, the familiar, comforting, painful scent, would not let me. I turned back to the diary, desperation clawing at my insides. What was going on? I needed answers. But when I opened the book again, the last page had changed. The ink was fresh, darker, more urgent. "Look behind you," it read. My breath caught in my throat. My body went rigid. I did not want to turn around, but I had to. My neck ached with the weight of what I knew would be there. Every nerve screamed at me not to look, but I did. Slowly, and there he was. Ronnie, pale, eyes hollow, dark circles underneath, like he hadn't slept in days, maybe longer. His face was gaunt, stretched too thin, as if the world had drained him dry. A twisted, empty smile twisted his lips, a smile I had never seen before. "You found it," he whispered, his voice hoarse, strained. "Now we'll never be apart." The pages of the diary rustled violently, as though caught in a wind only they could feel. The shadows in the room grew darker, thicker, closing in on me. The world itself seemed to tilt, and then the room was empty again. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing. No trace of him. No trace of the man I had loved, who had died so suddenly, so horribly. I stumbled back, my mind spinning, the room pressing in on me like the walls were alive, suffocating me. And then, as though nothing had happened at all, I was alone. Hours later, they found me. My hands were still clutching the diary, my body frozen in place. I had been muttering his name over and over, but they did not understand. They said I imagined it all, grief, guilt, madness. But I know the truth. Ronnie's diary did not just predict my life. It rewrote it. Some people say love fades over time. They're wrong. Sometimes, love rots, like flowers left too long in a vase, their petals curling inward until they smell like death itself. I learned that the hard way. It was one of those crisp evenings when the air had a bite, slipping through cracks in the windows and brushing against my skin like icy fingertips. I sat curled up on the couch, my legs tucked beneath me, a blanket draped across my lap. The only light came from a single floor lamp, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. The dim glow softened the edges of my apartment, the worn couch, the coffee table littered with books, and the faint outline of picture frames I hadn't yet filled. Outside, the city hummed faintly beneath the rustle of restless leaves scraping against the window pane. I loved this apartment. It was my fresh start, bright, open, with neighbors who minded their own business. After Jason and I broke up, I needed a clean slate. New job, new friends, new life. I finally felt free. Until the bouquet arrived. I almost didn't see it, tucked neatly against my door as though it had grown there overnight. Roses and lilies, fresh and vibrant, their fragrance thick in the cool evening air. The scent hit me before I even touched them, sweet, almost suffocating. No note, just an elegant arrangement waiting without explanation. I glanced down the hallway, but it was empty. "Must be a mistake," I muttered, picking it up and carrying it inside. The stems were cool against my palm, the petals soft as silk. I set the vase on the table near the window. Maybe a coworker sent it, or a neighbor. I should have thrown it out right then. But I didn't. By morning, the bouquet had changed. The petals had curled inward, their edges blackening as though they'd been scorched. A dark stain spread across the table beneath the vase, seeping into the wood grain. I frowned, leaning closer. The water inside wasn't clear anymore. It was thick, murky. Red. My stomach turned. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Weird plant disease," I told myself, grabbing a rag from the kitchen. But as I wiped the table, my hand trembled. The red stain clung stubbornly to the wood, refusing to disappear. No matter how hard I scrubbed, it lingered, a ghostly reminder etched into the surface. That night, the whispers began. Soft, insistent. My name, carried through the stillness of the dark. "Emily." My breath hitched. I sat up in bed, heart pounding against my ribs. The room was bathed in shadows, the faint glow of streetlights casting pale streaks across the walls. The sound came again, threading through the silence. "It's Emily." Jason's voice. The way he used to say my name when he wanted to apologize. I clutched the blanket to my chest, straining to hear over the rapid thudding of my heartbeat. But there was nothing, just the distant rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the city beyond the window. 3 days later, another bouquet appeared. This time, I hesitated. My gut twisted with unease as I stared down at the flowers, their vibrant colors almost garish under the pale hallway lights. Curiosity won out. I reached for the bouquet. I yelped, jerking my hand back. Blood welled on my fingertip, bright and glistening. I stared in disbelief. The thorns had grown longer, sharper, and they were wet. Not with dew. Blood. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pressed a tissue to my finger. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth as panic gnawed at my senses. Desperation clawed at me. I needed someone to talk me down from the ledge of my growing paranoia. I grabbed my phone and called Lily. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Emily, what time is it?" I need to talk," I stammered. "Geez, Em, it's like midnight, what's wrong?" "It's the flowers," I said, pacing the room. "They keep showing up and," I hesitated, feeling foolish. "It sounds crazy, but I think they're bleeding." There was a beat of silence. "You're imagining things," she said finally, her voice light with disbelief. "It's just post-breakup jitters. You'll be fine. Get some sleep, okay?" She didn't believe me. But I wasn't imagining things. The following week, another bouquet arrived, this time with a note. "For eternity, my love." I froze. The handwriting was unmistakable, Jason. The same looping letters, the distinct slant I knew by heart. My breath caught in my throat. Jason was dead. A car accident 6 months ago had taken his life. I'd seen the obituary, stood at his funeral, heard the sobs of his family. So who was sending the flowers? That night I stayed up, my pulse thrumming with dread. The minutes crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension coiling in my chest. At exactly 3:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. The sound shattered the silence, sharp and jarring. Some people say time heals all wounds. They're wrong. It's what you think you've forgotten that haunts you the most. I learned that the hard way. It was one of those unsettlingly quiet evenings when the air feels heavy with something unspoken. The kind of quiet where the hum of distant traffic fades into a hollow backdrop, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of dry paper skimming across the window pane. I sat curled up on the couch, fingers absently tracing the edge of my coffee mug. The dim glow from a single floor lamp painted the walls in muted amber, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless phantoms. The new apartment was perfect, bright during the day, cozy at night, with neighbors who minded their own business. After breaking up with Mark, I needed a fresh start. New job, new friends, a place where no one knew the weight of my past. I finally felt free, until the packages started arriving. The first one appeared on a Monday evening. A plain brown box neatly placed on my doorstep. No return address, no markings. I paused, a flicker of unease tightening my chest. The air seemed to shift, growing colder as I knelt to pick it up. Inside was a photograph, Mark and me, smiling on a sunlit beach. I hadn't seen that picture in years. I was sure I'd thrown it out during one of those post-breakup purges, the kind fueled by anger and cheap wine. My fingers trembled as I held it. The edges were worn, as if someone had handled it far too often. There was no note. I told myself it was probably some weird coincidence, a mix-up at the post office maybe, but the second package arrived 3 days later, a lock of hair tied neatly with a red ribbon. My stomach churned as I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. The hair was dark, coarse, Mark's hair. I wanted to believe it was just someone's sick idea of a joke, but deep down, dread coiled tight in my chest. The third package was worse, a cassette tape. The plastic felt brittle in my hands, cold against my skin. My breath caught as I inserted it into an old player I kept tucked away in a drawer. A faint hiss crackled through the speakers. Then, "Emily." Mark's voice. "Emily." Over and over, soft and insistent, like a mantra meant to summon something dark. My hands shook as I yanked the tape out, heart racing. Mark was gone. I hadn't seen him in years. He disappeared without a trace after the breakup. Desperation gnawed at me. I changed the locks, installed cameras, even filed a police report. The officers were polite but dismissive. "Probably just a prank," one of them said with a shrug, but nothing stopped the deliveries. They always came at night, left without a sound. The contents grew more disturbing. A cracked mirror, wilted black roses, pages torn from my journal. Whoever was doing this knew me, intimately. Driven by fear and desperation, I reached out to Mark's family. His mother's voice was brittle over the phone. "Emily, we thought you knew." "Knew what?" Her hesitation was palpable. "Mark's dead. He's been gone for 3 years." The world tilted beneath me. My breath hitched, a cold wave of dread washing over me. So who was sending the packages? That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The minutes crawled by, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension coiling in my chest. At exactly 3:15 a.m. it came, the knock, sharp, insistent. The sound sliced through the silence, reverberating through the apartment like a death knell. My breath hitched. I gripped the bat I'd left by the door, knuckles whitening around the handle. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on my lungs. I crept toward the door, every creak of the floorboards magnified in the stillness. The peephole revealed nothing but an empty hallway bathed in pale, fluorescent light. Still, I flung the door open, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. No one. Just another box. My hands shook as I knelt to lift the lid. Inside was a single item, Mark's engagement ring, the one I'd returned when we broke up. My vision blurred as cold terror gripped me. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door shut and throwing the deadbolt. The ring gleamed under the dim light, a cruel reminder of something I thought I'd buried. By dawn, I was done. I packed my things with trembling hands, throwing clothes into a suitcase without care. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to leave. They say it's over now, that I'm safe, but every night I still hear that knock, soft, persistent. And I wonder, was it ever really Mark, or something far worse? Something that still waits in the shadows, delivering memories I can't escape. I never believed in fate, until he came back. It started one rainy evening. The kind of night where the world outside is muted, every sound swallowed by the heavy sheets of water falling from the heavens. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, when the knock came. Slow, methodical, as though whoever was on the other side of the door knew exactly what they were doing. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. There was no reason anyone should be knocking at my door at this hour. I lived alone now. It's been years since I saw him. Years since we made the pact to never love anyone else. The words echoed in my head as I reached for the door. "We'll seal it in blood," he had said, his voice smooth and comforting. I didn't need to see the knife in his hand to know what he meant. We were young, reckless, and convinced that our love was enough to bind us together forever. But that was before the tragedy. Before everything fell apart, I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Derek. He hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered. His brown eyes, once warm and full of hope, were now dark, the light of youth extinguished. His hair, still the same messy brown curls, fell into his forehead. and his clothes were old and faded, as though he'd been living out of a suitcase for far too long. "Lena," he whispered, his voice low, filled with an ache that made my stomach twist. "It's been too long." I swallowed the lump in my throat, the memories of our past flashing in front of my eyes. But I was older now, wiser. There was nothing left for us to discuss. "I thought you were gone, Derek," I said, my voice steady, but my heart hammered in my chest. I thought you left me for good." His gaze softened, but it was fleeting. "I never left, I just needed time." I wanted to slam the door in his face, to shut him out and pretend that this nightmare wasn't real. But something about the way he stood there, like he belonged in my life, made my hand freeze on the knob. My heart ached for the boy I once knew, but I had grown up since then, and the past had a way of staying buried. Until it didn't. "I came to fulfill the pact," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if confessing to some ancient sin. "We made a promise, Lena. I came back because we have to keep it." Confusion clouded my thoughts, but then I remembered. The blood oath we swore to never love another, to never part from one another. We had been so foolish, so blinded by youthful passion. But I didn't think the pact was real. It could not be. It was something said in a moment of desperation. A plea for love that was never meant to be taken seriously. "Derek." "That was years ago," I said, shaking my head. "It's over. We've both moved on." His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "No, Lena, you haven't." I felt an eerie chill run down my spine, the air growing colder around me. Derek stepped closer, the smell of stale earth and decay clinging to him, like he had been wandering through the graveyard of our past. "You're lying to yourself," he muttered, reaching for my hand. His fingers were ice cold, but I didn't pull away. Not yet. "You never stopped loving me." You don't know what you're saying." He stepped inside, his presence like a shadow that consumed the room. "I was never meant to leave you, and you." He stopped, his gaze narrowing, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "You were never meant to love anyone else." Panic surged inside me. "What are you talking about?" Derek's lips curved into a twisted smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The pact was a bond, Lena, and bonds, they can't be broken, not by time, not by distance, not by death." I took a step back, my breath coming quicker. The room felt smaller now. His presence was too much, like something dark had crawled in with him and was closing in on me. "You left," I whispered, almost pleading. "You left me to suffer. I thought you were gone." "I never left you," he repeated, his voice now cold, cruel. "I was waiting for you to remember." The lights flickered, and I jumped, my heart racing. Something was wrong. The air thickened, suffocating me. The shadows twisted unnaturally, creeping along the walls. I began, but my voice faltered as I stared into his eyes, unable to look away. A sudden, sharp pain exploded in my chest, as if someone had driven a dagger into my heart. I gasped for air, clutching at my chest, but nothing helped. "Lena," Derek whispered, his face close to mine. "The pact is still alive. You can't run from it, not now, not ever." The room began to blur, the edges of my vision darkening as I collapsed onto the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears, but Derek's voice was the only thing I could hear. "You were never meant to love anyone else, Lena," he repeated. "Not while I'm here." I struggled to breathe, my limbs growing heavier by the second. My mind was breaking. I could not escape. I could not wake up from this nightmare, and then everything went silent. I opened my eyes, only to find myself standing at the edge of the woods, the same woods we used to wander through together. The same trees, the same dark, twisted path. And there, at the end of it, stood Derek, watching me. "You're still mine, Lena," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. I reached out to him, my body moving of its own accord, but the closer I got, the further he seemed to retreat. And then I heard it, the sound of a woman's scream, a distant, agonizing wail that filled the air, carrying on the wind. I stopped. Something was wrong. A flash of movement to my right caught my attention. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood there watching me. The air felt thick with dread. I turned, but Derek was gone. All that was left was the echo of his voice, whispering in my mind, "The pact is forever." Some people say moving on is the hardest part of a breakup. They were wrong. It's not the ending that's the hardest part, it's the aftermath. The night is heavy, suffocating, as if the world outside has frozen in place. The only sound is the faint hum of traffic, distant and muted, a whisper of life beyond my walls. Inside, it's still. Too still. Every breath feels amplified in the silence, the kind that presses against your chest, making you feel small. The old apartment building creaks around me, settling into itself. But it's not the building that makes the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It's the quiet that stretches, lingering too long like something about to break. I sink deeper into the worn leather couch, my fingers tracing the fraying edge of an old photograph. The glow from the dim lamp flickers above, casting long, jagged shadows that dance across the walls like ghosts. Outside, the rain taps relentlessly against the window, steady and unyielding, a lullaby for the restless, for those who can't find peace. I can't let go of it. The past clings to me, a shadow that I can't shake off. It lingers in the corners of my mind, in the whisper of every gust of wind, in every creak of the floorboards. It never really ends. 2 months ago, I ended things with Alex. It was supposed to be the end, the final chapter. But endings aren't always so clean. There's always something left behind, something that refuses to fade into memory. We were fire and ice, passionate but destined to destroy each other. I remember the way he'd look at me like he could see right through to the very core of me, burning with something dangerous. And then the cold would come. Silence. Guilt. That suffocating silence that would stretch between us for hours, days. No one ever tells you that love can be a cage until you're locked inside it. After the breakup, I moved. A fresh start. I found this apartment on Pine Street. It was cozy, small but warm, tucked away on a quiet street. It was exactly what I needed. A clean slate. I could breathe here. I thought the walls would absorb my memories and I could build something new. The neighbors were friendly, mostly retirees and young couples. The kind of people who don't make a sound, who go about their lives quietly, blending into the background. It was a safe place, or so I thought, until the new tenant moved in downstairs. At first it was subtle, just faint sounds through the walls, the scraping of furniture being moved late at night. Low murmurs, voices through the vents. It didn't bother me at first. People live on different schedules, I could ignore it, let it wash over me like everything else. But then I saw it. The name on the mailbox, Alex Parker, my heart stops. The world shifts beneath my feet, tilting just enough that everything feels off. A different Alex Parker, maybe, but the last name. The first name, it's not a coincidence. My ex, living right below me. I try to convince myself it's just a coincidence. There are other Alex Parkers out there, right? It's a common name. But the doubt gnaws at me, digging deeper with every passing day. I can't escape it. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that I've moved on, that I'm over it. But the truth is I'm not. And I won't be, not as long as that name hovers just below me. The calls started after that. I can't remember when it happened exactly. Maybe it was that same night or the next. The phone rings in the dark, its shrill tone piercing through the silence. My heart stutters in my chest. I answer, half expecting a telemarketer or some wrong number. But when I pick up, it's not a voice, it's just breathing. Slow, deliberate, deep, measured breaths. I don't hang up. I wait because something inside me tells me that if I do, something will happen. I slam the phone down after a minute, my hands shaking. But the calls don't stop. The next night, the phone rings again. Same breathing, same quiet, suffocating rhythm. I block the number, but they keep coming. Night after night. It's like I can't escape it. And then the gift started. At first, I thought it was just some weird coincidence, flowers left on my doorstep. A bouquet of black, wilted blooms that looked like they had been abandoned in the rain for days. But the second time was different. It was a photo, a picture of me and Alex from back when things were still. Okay, the good times before everything went wrong. But then I noticed something strange, a lock of hair, not just any hair, it was my hair. I could not ignore it anymore. My pulse races as I stare at the photo. My breath catches in my throat. I have to do something. I can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. This isn't some random prank. Someone is watching me, someone who knows too much, someone who isn't ready to let go. One evening, with my heart pounding in my chest, I knock on the door downstairs. My hand trembles as I reach for the door, my knuckles just brushing the surface. The air feels too thick, too still. The world outside might be moving, but here, in this moment, everything's frozen. I feel eyes on me even before I knock. Something's wrong. I should not be doing this. But I do it anyway. No answer, but I feel it. I press my eye to the peephole, but all I see is darkness. It's too quiet, too still. I step back, my breath caught in my throat. I can feel them. Someone's there just on the other side of the door, watching me, waiting. I should leave. I should turn around and never come back, but I don't. I can't. Instead, I call the landlord. His voice comes through the phone, calm, too calm. He tells me the apartment downstairs has been empty for months. Empty? How is that possible? I've seen him. I've heard him. The footsteps, the muffled voices, the breathing. The lies feel like they were suffocating me. I can't breathe. I can't think. That night, I hear the footsteps again, heavy, slow, deliberate. They echo through the floorboards below me. The air is thick with it, like the sound is alive, crawling under my skin. I grab a flashlight, my hands shaking as I make my way down the stairs. The door is ajar, the lock broken. I push it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and step inside. The apartment is empty. Bare walls. No furniture, just a space, hollow and waiting. But the air is thick, suffocating. It's not just empty, it's wrong. It reeks of decay, something rotting, something dead, and then I see it. In the center of the room, a shrine. Photos of me, strands of my hair, scrawled notes begging for my return. I'm frozen. My breath hitches in my throat. And in the center of it all, carved into the floor with red, forever. I left the next morning. I packed my things, got out as quickly as I could. I thought that was the end. I thought if I left, I'd be safe. But I still hear those footsteps, every night. Slow, deliberate, the sound of someone waiting. My name is Charlotte, and I suppose you could say I'm just an ordinary woman trying to make sense of a world that rarely makes sense back. I live in a modest apartment filled with second-hand furniture that I've somehow managed to make my own. I'm a freelance designer. Logos, illustrations, and anything else that pays the bills. My days are filled with coffee that's a little too strong, the comforting buzz of background noise from the city outside my window, and the steady hum of my laptop as I work. Life hasn't always been kind, but routine has been my refuge, my way of staying grounded. I've always found solace in routine. It's the anchor that keeps me steady when the chaos of the world threatens to pull me under. Mornings begin with a cup of dark roast coffee, brewed strong enough to jolt my senses awake. I sit by the window of my modest apartment, watching the city slowly come to life. The comforting hum of traffic mixed with the distant chatter of early risers creates a symphony I've grown to depend on. But today is different. The smell hits me first, thick and cloying, like ink but far more metallic. I freeze, closing the door behind me, the sound of the latch echoing through the quiet space. The familiar warmth of my sanctuary has been replaced by an oppressive weight, as if the very air has thickened. I scan the apartment. Everything in place. Books neatly arranged on the shelves, my favorite throw blanket draped over the armrest of the couch, and the desk by the window where I often lose myself in sketches and designs for my freelance projects. But then I see it, the stack of papers on the desk. They weren't there when I left this morning. Neatly arranged, the pages gleam under the dim light of the desk lamp. At first glance, they look like love letters, an archaic tradition I've always found charming, albeit impractical. My breath hitches as I step closer. The scent grows stronger, making my stomach churn. I reach out, my fingers trembling slightly as I pick up the top sheet. The paper's cold. Not just the paper, but the words scrawled across it. Cold like a forgotten grave. My pulse quickens as my eyes scan the text. Do you remember when we said we'd always be together? You didn't believe me, but you will now. The handwriting is unmistakable Oliver's. His familiar slanted letters and elegant curves stare back at me, each stroke a haunting echo of our past. My chest tightens. It's been 2 months since Oliver disappeared from my life. 2 months since our final confrontation, when I discovered the lies he'd been hiding. He vanished without a word, leaving behind a tangled mess of emotions I'm still trying to unravel. My fingers brush against a crimson streak on the page. Not ink. Blood. fresh. My breath comes in shallow gasps as I shuffle through the stack of letters. Each one is more disturbing than the last, filled with twisted declarations and unsettling promises. My name is scrawled across each page, binding me to the words in a way that feels suffocating. I drop the papers onto the desk, my heart hammering in my chest. This isn't possible. Oliver's gone. He has to be. The room seems to close in around me, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision. I shake my head, trying to dispel the rising panic. Get a grip, I mutter to myself. It's just a prank, someone's messing with me. But who would do this? And how did they know about Oliver? A sudden creak shatters the silence. I whip around, my breath catching in my throat. The door to my apartment is ajar, swaying gently as though someone had just passed through. Hello, my voice wavers. Silence. I take a tentative step forward, every nerve in my body on high alert. The hallway beyond the door is empty, bathed in the dim glow of the overhead light. Suddenly, my phone buzzes in my pocket, the vibration startling me. I fumble for it, hopping for a distraction, maybe a text from a friend or an email that'll pull me back to reality. The message on the screen makes my blood run cold. You can never escape the past, my love. The number is unknown. My fingers tremble as I reread the text, disbelief mingling with terror. This can't be happening, I whisper. The door creaks again, slower this time. The scent of ink and blood grows stronger, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. From the corner of the room, a figure emerges from the shadows. Tall, unmistakable, Oliver. My breath catches in my throat. His eyes are wide and empty, black holes that swallow the light. He stands motionless, his presence filling the room with a suffocating weight. No, I whisper, shaking my head. You're not real, you can't be real. But he takes a step toward me, his movements deliberate and unyielding. Crimson stains mark his hands, the same color as the streaks on the letters. I warned you, his voice echoes, not just in the room, but inside my mind, a whisper that burrows deep into my thoughts. I stumble back, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The walls press in, and the floor seems to tilt. My vision blurs as I reach out, desperate for something to hold on to. Stay away, I gasp. Oliver's form twists, his features contorting into something grotesque. His lips curl into a smile that isn't a smile at all, more like a gaping maw filled with darkness. You never appreciated me, did you? But you will now. Forever. My knees buckle, and I fall to the ground, gasping for air. The floor beneath me is slick, cold, and sticky with something that clings to my skin. The room spins, the letters on the desk fluttering as if lifted by an unseen wind. Oliver's laughter fills the space, chilling and endless. You'll never be free of me, he says. You belong to me in life and in death. The words resonate in the air, vibrating in my chest. Darkness closes in around me, pressing against my ribs until I can't breathe. And then, nothing. When I open my eyes, the apartment is silent. Empty. The bloodied letters, the scent, the shadow, they're gone. I push myself up, my body trembling. The light of dawn filters through the window, casting long beams across the floor. But as I step into the living room, my heart sinks. On the floor, just beside the door, is a fresh envelope. The wax seal is crimson, the writing sharp and angular. Oliver. My hands shake as I break the seal, unfolding the crisp paper inside. You'll be seeing me again soon. I woke up to the sound of the doorbell ringing. It was early, too early for anyone to be calling. My mind was foggy, still caught in the remnants of a nightmare I could not shake off. Groggy and half-dressed, I stumbled down the hall to answer the door. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Lily Hall stood on the other side, smiling like she had just stepped out of one of the old photos we used to keep on the fridge. I froze. My ex-girlfriend, who had moved across the country 3 years ago, was standing in my doorway. Hey, Liam, she said casually, as though this was just another normal visit. It's been a while. I stood there, blinking in confusion. My throat tightened, and for a moment I wondered if I was still dreaming. She could not possibly be here. It wasn't possible. Lily, I croaked, my voice coming out rough. What are you doing here? She laughed softly, stepping inside like she owned the place. I thought I'd stop by. Missed you, you know. You never did reply to my last message. I backed away from the door, feeling the weight of 1,000 memories crashing over me. I had told her I needed space after everything fell apart. After the fights, the lies, the way things ended in flames. I had moved on. I was finally starting to feel normal again, but now this. "How did you get here?" I asked, still processing what I was seeing. "You live on the other side of the country. You did not tell me you were coming." Lily's smile faded, but she did not seem disturbed. In fact, she almost looked confused by my confusion. "I've always been here, Liam," she said, her voice strangely calm. "I never left." I stared at her, a pit of dread opening in my stomach. I had to be losing my mind. I blinked again, trying to shake the fog from my mind, but Lily was still there, her clothes fresh and clean, like she had just walked in from the street. But the memory of her leaving, the final goodbye I had to force myself to say, was crystal clear. She left. She went away. I tried to speak again, but the words wouldn't come. My brain could not catch up to the impossible reality standing before me. I don't understand," I stammered. You were gone. You were gone for 3 years." Lily stepped closer, her eyes soft, almost pitying, as if she were talking to a child. "No, Liam, I've been here. I never left. You're just forgetting things." Something wasn't right. I had to clear my head. I turned and looked at the clock, my chest tightening when I saw the time. It was too late for her to have arrived in the middle of the night. She had moved away, and the last thing I'd heard from her was a quick, polite text. "Goodbye." I could not breathe. My thoughts scattered as I tried to piece it all together. Something about her presence made the house feel cold. I felt a chill down my spine. It wasn't just her. There was something off about the entire room. A subtle heaviness in the air, like something unseen was pressing in. I hadn't felt this unnerved since the night I ended things. "You're not real," I muttered under my breath. "This isn't real." Lily tilted her head, her expression darkening just slightly. "I told you I never left." Her tone was no longer soft. It was colder, like she was speaking through a mask or perhaps something else entirely. "I'm calling the cops," I said, my hand trembling as I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, the room darkened. The lights flickered. A loud crash came from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest. I spun toward the stairs. Lily remained motionless, her eyes fixated on me with a strange intensity, watching me carefully, silently. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Only you can hear it," she said with a strange calmness, her gaze unwavering. "That is always how it's been." I looked back at her. My body went cold. What was happening? She wasn't the same. The Lily I once knew would have been terrified if she heard a noise like that. But this was different. I took a step toward the stairs, my pulse racing. "I need to check upstairs." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Lily called after me in a flat voice. But I ignored her, running up the stairs anyway, my steps louder than the strange noise below. When I reached the top, I found nothing. The hallway was quiet, empty, just the way I left it. But something gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, I felt a pressure in my chest, like I was being suffocated. I gasped for air, stumbling back toward the stairs. And that is when I saw it. The mirror at the end of the hallway reflected something I hadn't expected. Lily. But she wasn't standing in front of me, was she? She wasn't at the top of the stairs, walking toward me. The woman in the mirror stood completely still, her hands clenched into fists, and her lips drawn into a thin line. Her eyes were wide with rage, feral, unhinged, and there was a twisted darkness around her that I did not recognize. I backed away in horror, turning my head quickly. Lily was still downstairs, standing by the front door, waiting patiently. "Liam," she said softly, her voice deceptively sweet, "you should not have come up here." I did not know what to believe. My heart pounded in my ears as the world around me began to feel like a nightmare that was closing in. Had I finally cracked? Was this a psychotic episode? Or was there something more, something darker at play? I stumbled back, falling to my knees. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Lily's smile returned, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was sharp, sinister, knowing. "I'm the part of you that you can never escape," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked underfoot. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house, closer now. Too close. I turned to look at her once more, but she was gone. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. It started with a glitch. I know it sounds silly, but that's how it began. A simple glitch. The kind of glitch you would dismiss as a technical hiccup or a system error. But it was not. It was not a glitch at all. It was something much darker, something I never could have predicted. I had been staring at my phone, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram when I saw her. Jenna, my ex. But it didn't make sense. I had erased every trace of her from my life, deleted every photo, every post, and every memory. I'd blocked her on every platform and turned off all notifications that had anything to do with her. The relationship had ended months ago, and I thought I was finally moving on. So why, in the middle of my feed, was Jenna staring back at me? Her face, clear, crisp, and all too familiar, appeared in an advertisement for some random skincare product. But it was her. I could NPT explain it. I could see every freckle on her nose, the curve of her lips, and the softness of her eyes. It was like she was right there in front of me, her image flashing like an unwanted ghost. I shook my head. "It's just a coincidence," I muttered, tapping the ad closed. "It's just a glitch." But it was. It wasn't just a glitch. The next morning, I opened my phone to check the time. And there she was again, this time on a YouTube thumbnail, smiling like nothing had ever happened between us. She was a part of a sponsored video. A cooking tutorial of all things. Her hands moving deftly as she chopped vegetables, her face once again splashed across my screen. I froze. I told myself it was another coincidence. Maybe the algorithm had just pulled an image from an old video or a photo from a time when we were happy. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something far darker was at play. I could not stop. I spent hours combing through every social media platform trying to figure out what was going on. Jenna's face was everywhere. A banner ad on Facebook. A background image on a Spotify playlist. Her face, impossible to ignore, popping up in places it should not have been. I could almost hear her voice, her laugh, as if she was sitting next to me again, just like the old days. But it was all wrong. It was wrong because she was gone. Jenna had disappeared without a trace after we broke up. She had moved away to another city, and I thought that was the end of it. I thought I was free from her, from the guilt, from the pain. But now, the more I saw her, the more I felt her presence. It was like she was everywhere, breathing down my neck, following me, stalking me. I tried to turn everything off. I logged out of every account. I deleted my social media apps. But it did not help. Jenna kept appearing on every device I owned. She was there on my laptop when I opened it for work, her face staring back at me from a news article about celebrities. She was there in the reflection of my phone screen when I looked away. I couldn't escape her. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Every night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of my phone charging on the bedside table, as though it was calling out to me. I needed answers. I had to know why this was happening. That's when I stumbled across something, a message from an anonymous account, a message that chilled me to the bone. It was on one of the forums I frequented, a place where people shared their weirdest digital experiences. The message was simple: "You're not the only one." At first, I thought it was a joke, but then I dug deeper, reading more posts from others who described the exact same phenomenon. People who had broken up with their exes, people who had erased all trace of them from their lives, were all experiencing the same thing. The same glitches, the same digital hauntings. It wasn't just a glitch, it was something more. But what, and why? Why was Jenna haunting me like this? I couldn't stop myself. I had to find out. I tracked down the IP address from the anonymous message, tracing it back to a group. A small underground community that claimed to harness the power of social media in ways that no one should ever understand. It was all coded messages, cryptic forums, and algorithmic rituals. They had tapped into something dark, something forbidden. And they had done it to me. The more I learned, the more I realized the truth. Jenna was not haunting me in the way I thought. She wasn't trying to make contact. She was trying to escape. The algorithm had trapped her. Somehow, somewhere along the line, the system had absorbed her image, her data, her memories, and she could not escape. She was stuck in the endless cycle of digital reincarnation, forced to live forever on screens that I couldn't turn off. The community had created a memory erasure ritual designed to remove someone from your life completely. But in their greed and manipulation of the algorithm, they had made a mistake. They had not erased her. They had trapped her. I was the one who had triggered it. My attempt to erase her had caused the glitch. The more I stared at her face, the more it became clear Jenna was not just trapped in the digital world. She was becoming the algorithm, a part of the code itself, alive in every data stream. She was everywhere now, on every screen, on every device, in every app. And I could not escape. It started with the rain, that soft, rhythmic tapping against the windows, a steady cadence that should have been soothing. Instead, it carried a strange weight, as though the night itself held its breath, waiting. I sat in my dimly lit apartment, nursing a cup of cold coffee that had long since lost its bitter warmth. The lamp on the side table flickered occasionally, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. Sleep had been elusive for weeks, and tonight was no different. Then came the knock. Slow, deliberate. Each strike against the wood resonated through the quiet room, sending a shiver down my spine before I even realized I was afraid. I froze, the ceramic mug in my hands growing colder by the second. No one knocked at this hour. My building was the kind where neighbors kept to themselves, and visitors were rare. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, convincing myself that it was just someone at the wrong door. But the knock came again. 3 measured raps, insistent and patient. Setting the mug down, I rose from the couch, every instinct urging me to retreat instead of approach. My bare feet made no sound against the hardwood floor as I crossed the living room. I hesitated at the door, fingers hovering over the peephole. What if it was him? I shook off the thought. That was impossible. Liam was gone, had been for 2 years. I had buried that part of my life, or at least tried to. Still, memories had a way of clinging to the corners of your mind, resurfacing when you least expected them. Taking a steadying breath, I peered through the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, dimly illuminated by the flickering overhead light. No sign of anyone, just the quiet hum of the building settling into the night. I unlocked the door and opened it cautiously, the hinges creaking in protest. There was nothing, no figure lurking in the shadows, no sign of the knocker. But there was a trunk. It sat just outside my door, heavy and ancient, its dark wood warped by time. Brass locks gleamed under the weak light, polished and incongruously pristine. The trunk carried an earthy scent, damp and almost rotten, as though it had been unearthed from some forgotten place. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that trunk. It was Liam. 2 years had passed since I'd last seen him. Back then, he had a magnetic charm, the kind that pulled you in before you realized you were caught. He was intense, passionate, and brilliant in ways that made the rest of the world feel dull. But passion had a dark side, and Liam's love had turned suffocating. When we broke up, his obsession took a dangerous turn. The letters came first, pleading, threatening, sometimes both in the same breath. I changed my number, moved apartments, and eventually the letters stopped. I thought I was free. Until I heard about the ritual. A desperate attempt to bind souls, they said. A foolish game that cost him his life. And yet, here was his trunk. My hands trembled as I knelt beside it. The wood was rough under my fingertips, and the brass locks felt cold, almost unnaturally so. I hesitated before unfastening them, a voice in my head screaming to stop. But curiosity, or perhaps something darker, urged me on. The locks clicked open with a sharp finality. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing a collection of strange and unsettling items. Candles melted down to stubs, a cracked mirror that reflected distorted fragments of my face, and a journal, Liam's journal. The leather cover was worn, edges frayed from use. I traced the familiar initials embossed on the front, a chill running down my spine. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The first few entries were familiar, obsessive ramblings about our time together, memories painted in his manic handwriting. But then the tone shifted. The entries weren't about the past anymore. They were about me, my life now. Details no one else could possibly know. My breath hitched as I read the last line on the page. Tonight, she will open this journal, and it will ruin her. That was today. I slammed the journal shut, my pulse racing. This was madness. Liam was dead. He could not have written this, but the journal whispered truths I could not ignore. Tomorrow, it claimed, she will hear his voice again. A hollow laugh escaped my lips, desperate and edged with hysteria. Liam was gone. He could not speak. And then the phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, sharp and jarring. I stared at the glowing screen, dread coiling in my stomach. The number was unlisted. Heart pounding, I answered. Hello. Silence stretched on the other end, thick and oppressive. I was about to hang up when a voice whispered through the line. Hello, love. My blood turned to ice. It was unmistakable. Liam, desperation clawed at my throat. Who is this? I demanded. He chuckled softly, the sound low and sinister. You know who it is. This isn't possible, I whispered. You opened the trunk, he said, his voice slithering through my thoughts. You invited me back. Panic gripped me as shadows twisted along the walls, dark tendrils creeping toward me. The air grew thick, stifling. I stumbled backward, my mind racing for a way out. The journal. With trembling hands, I grabbed it and frantically flipped through the pages, searching for answers. The ink seemed to writhe on the paper, shifting and changing before my eyes. Burn it, the words demanded. I did not. Hesitate. Grabbing a box of matches from the kitchen drawer, I struck one and held it to the edge of the journal. The flame caught, hungry and fierce, consuming the pages. The shadows writhed, shrieking as the fire devoured his words. Liam's voice grew louder, a cacophony of rage and desperation. You can't get rid of me, he roared. We were meant to be one. The flames roared higher, illuminating the room in a fierce glow. And then silence. The air cleared, the oppressive weight lifting. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. They say I imagined it all, grief, guilt, madness. But I know the truth. Liam's obsession didn't end with death. It had been months since Jake and I broke up, but the pain felt like it happened only yesterday. I had spent hours staring at the empty space next to me on the couch, hoping that somehow the ache would fade. But it did not. Not even after I packed up his things and erased every trace of him from my apartment. He was supposed to be the one. We had always said that. Jake had promised me more than once that we were forever, that no matter what, we'd be together. But promises, like everything else, could be broken. I am never going to leave you, he'd said the last time we spoke, just before we parted ways. It had been a strange thing to hear coming from him. The words weren't comforting, they felt like a curse. A month had passed, and I thought I was doing better. I was slowly rebuilding my life, finding my own rhythm again. Then the first message came. It was from an unknown number, a message with no words, just an image. The picture was of Jake and me from a time when everything had felt perfect. We were at a coffee shop, laughing at something stupid I had said. I hadn't seen this photo in ages. I had deleted it from my phone the night we broke up. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just some sick prank. But then it came again, this time with a single sentence. You can't run from me forever. I froze. My pulse quickened. That phrase, Jake had said it before, many times, always with a teasing tone when we were joking around. But this wasn't a joke. I turned off my phone, thinking that would be enough. I needed to calm down to breathe. But when I lay in bed that night, I could hear it, the soft sound of footsteps, faint but unmistakable. They weren't my own. I sat up, looking around the room. No one was there. The footsteps stopped. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the unease lingered. Then, 2 days later, I heard his voice. I was at the grocery store, standing in the checkout line when it happened. It wasn't a message this time. It was a phone call from an unknown number. "You can't run from me forever," Jake's voice said again. I dropped the phone, the screen lighting up with his name, the very name I had blocked months ago. My hands shook as I backed away from the counter, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of the situation. My mind raced. How could he still be reaching me? I had erased every trace of him. The fear began to eat at me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I felt his presence everywhere. It was like the world was bending around me, like reality itself was shifting. Things began to happen that I could not explain. Objects would be moved from where I left them. Doors would creak open when I was sure they were shut. It was as though Jake was always just out of sight, a whispering shadow that followed me. A week later, I was sitting on my couch, half watching TV, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, unsure if I should even open it. But when I approached the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small package sat on the doorstep, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I had no idea how it got there, but I knew who it was from. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside, there was a photo of me, standing alone at the window of my apartment, staring outside. It was taken from the street below, so close that the outline of the person who had snapped the picture was barely visible in the corner. And beneath it, scrawled in messy handwriting, was a single sentence. "We're not finished yet, Emma." I slammed the door shut and backed away. My heart pounded in my chest. This could not be happening. I could not be going mad. There was no way. But as the days passed, the occurrences only grew more frequent. I started seeing Jake everywhere. He'd be standing across the street when I left my apartment. I had catch a glimpse of him in the corner of my eye in crowded spaces, always just out of reach, like he was stalking me from the shadows. One night, as I walked home from work, I felt it, the chill in the air that I knew wasn't natural. It was him. I could feel him behind me, watching me, waiting. I did not dare look back, but I could hear his footsteps getting closer. Then in the distance, I saw a figure standing by the streetlight. I knew deep down it was him. "We're not finished yet," his voice whispered into the cold night air. I tried to run, but my legs would not move. It was like I was stuck, frozen in place. I could not escape him. I could not escape the promises he made, the promises that had bound us together, even beyond death, even beyond the grave. I woke up the next morning, back in my apartment, unsure of how I had gotten there. The whole night felt like a dream, but it was too real to be one. I tried to convince myself I had just imagined it all. But when I looked at the reflection in my bedroom mirror, there was something in my eyes, something dark, something lost. And deep within the reflection, I saw him. Jake. Standing just behind me. "You'll regret this, Emma, I promise." And that was the last time I saw myself as I truly was. From that moment on, there was only him. The promise never ended. The locket was cold against my chest. It hadn't been there before, I'm certain of it. I'd been in bed, restless as usual, the sheets tangled around my limbs, a storm raging outside when the sensation started. A pressure like something was pushing down on my heart. It was subtle at first, just a twinge in my ribs, but it grew. By the time I sat up, sweat trickling down my back, it felt as if a weight was pressing against me. Something heavy, something I could not see but could feel. I reached to my chest, expecting nothing but the smoothness of my skin. Instead, my fingers brushed against metal. Cold, smooth, unfamiliar. A locket. I hadn't worn it in years. I had thrown it away, buried it deep in a box at the back of the closet after everything had ended with Lucas. He had given it to me on our first anniversary, a promise of forever. He had always been so certain, so sure. I, on the other hand, had been unsure even then, but I wore the locket anyway. I wore it until the last bitter words, the last look he gave me before he left, before I found out about the lies. My chest tightened, and I could feel my heart hammering against the locket as though it were alive. I pulled at it. Nothing. It would not budge. The clasp was stiff, like it had fused with my skin. I gasped, panic rising in my throat. It was as if the locket was alive, refusing to leave, refusing to let go. There was no way it could have come back. I had thrown it away. I hadn't even thought about it in months. So why was it back? I twisted my body, tugging again, more frantically now. The chain dug into my neck as if the metal were alive, pulling tighter with every desperate movement. But no matter what I did, I could not remove it. I could feel the cool, hard edges pressing against my collarbone, the weight of it almost unbearable. I fell back onto the bed, my breath ragged. The storm outside raged louder, thunder crashing through the silence of the room. But then came the whisper. I froze. It was soft, almost too soft to hear, barely a breath, but it was there, a voice, Lucas's voice. "You'll never be rid of me." I shot up, looking around the room, heart racing. The door was closed, the windows shut tight. No one was here. I grabbed the locket again, pulling with all my might, but the damn thing refused to move. It felt like it was stuck to me, like it was a part of my skin. My hands trembled as I fumbled with it, trying to pry it open, but I could not. The latch remained tightly shut, the metal cold and unyielding. And then I heard it, the faintest rustling of paper. I turned slowly, dread curling in my stomach. On the desk by the window, there was an envelope. I don't remember it being there before. I took tentative steps toward it, my heart thumping so loud in my ears I could barely hear the faint rustling sound. The letter was addressed to me. In Lucas's handwriting. "I'm still here, you know." My breath caught, my pulse quickened. I ripped open the envelope and there it was, a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in the same handwriting. But it wasn't a message I could understand, not at first. The words blurred together, distorted, as though something was wrong with my vision. The paper, no, it wasn't paper anymore. It was wet, soaked with something dark, something I could not identify at first. And then the realization hit me. Blood. I dropped the letter, stumbling backward. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached up to touch my neck. The locket had shifted. The clasp was now digging into my flesh, almost as if it were drawing blood from me. "I will never leave you," the letter read in a blood-stained smear. "Not until you remember. Remember." The words seemed to echo in my mind, resonating, twisting. I was remembering things now, things I had tried to bury, to forget. Lucas's possessive touch. His constant need to control, to hold on to me. The way he would show up uninvited, his presence always looming, even when I asked for space. It had never been normal. It had always been suffocating. I staggered toward the mirror, my reflection distorted by the dim light. The locket had grown tighter. It was part of me now, its chain cutting into my skin, a permanent mark of ownership. And then, just as I was about to collapse, a whisper in the dark, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. "I'm still here." I spun around, but the room was empty. I could not think clearly anymore. My hands shook as I reached for the locket again. It was no use. It would not move. It would not let me go. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and my vision blurred. The world spun. I staggered toward the door, desperate to escape. To get away from the locket, from Lucas's grip, from whatever dark force had taken hold of me. But as my fingers touched the door, I heard it again, the sound of paper rustling, faint, almost like a breeze. I turned, dreading what I might find, and there it was, another envelope, another message. "I told you, did I?" This time, the blood on the paper wasn't just Lucas's words, it was his face. His smiling, empty face staring back at me. The locket had become a curse, an unbreakable bond. The longer I tried to remove it, the more it hurt, like it was carving its way into me. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. The whispers filled the room again, and I knew, just knew, that this was never going to stop. The locket wasn't just a gift. It was a promise, a twisted promise, and I was trapped with it forever. There's something about waking up to a silence so heavy it presses against your chest. A silence that doesn't belong. It was the kind of quiet that settled like a fog over the neighborhood. No barking dogs, no rattling fence posts from the wind. Not even the occasional creak of tree branches swaying against each other. Just a void, smothering and complete. I sat up in bed, my breath shallow, ears straining for any sound at all. Nothing. My hand found the edge of the curtain, fingers trembling as I pulled it aside. The backyard stretched before me, illuminated by the pale wash of moonlight. Shadows twisted and danced among the bushes, but nothing moved, at least nothing I could see. It's just the wind, I whispered to myself, trying to make it true. But I knew better. I'd known for weeks, maybe months. Something was wrong. Funny how quickly normal life can unravel. 2 months ago, I was just Sarah, the girl next door with a decent job, a solid group of friends, and a dating history tragic enough to be a punchline. The last name on that list, Josh. Tall, charming, and just unhinged enough that hindsight now painted every red flag in blinding neon. We met at a friend's barbecue, sparks flying almost immediately. He was everything I thought I wanted. Attentive, funny, confident. For a while, things were great. But then his charm twisted into control. Innocent questions became interrogations. Jokes turned into thinly veiled criticisms. When I finally broke it off, I expected some awkward texts and maybe a drunken voicemail or two. What I didn't expect was obsession. It started small. A flicker of movement outside my bedroom window late one night. I told myself it was a stray cat. Then there were the flowers, wilted daisies tied with fraying string, left on my front porch. No note. I laughed it off at first. A weird coincidence, nothing more. But then I noticed the garden gate swinging open every morning, even though I latched it every night. My friends waved it away. "Probably just the wind," they said. But wind doesn't trample flower beds or leave boot prints in the dirt. Paranoia crept in slowly, like ivy wrapping around my chest. I double-checked the locks, then triple-checked. Every creak of the house became a threat. Every shadow held a pair of unseen eyes. I was being watched. I just didn't know by who or why. It was a warm Friday night, and I was determined to shake off the anxiety that clung to me like a second skin. After a long day at work, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the patio. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, the sky painted in hues of deep indigo. For the first time in weeks, I let myself relax, and that's when I saw it. Movement at the edge of the garden. My breath hitched as I squinted into the darkness. A figure crouched low among the shrubs, motionless as a statue. My pulse thundered in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed 911. The call was still connecting when the figure stood, and I saw his face. Josh. Wild-eyed, disheveled, grinning like he'd just won some twisted game. The police arrived within minutes, lights slicing through the darkness as they hauled Josh away. I filed a restraining order. Case closed, right, wrong. The flowers kept coming. Shadows lingered just beyond my vision. And then, one night, I woke to the unmistakable creak of floorboards inside my house. My breath caught in my throat. I lay frozen, heart hammering against my ribs. Was it my imagination? No. The soft scrape of footsteps grew louder, moving toward my bedroom door. I reached for the nearest weapon, a lamp on my nightstand, and clutched it tightly. The door handle turned slowly. It swung open, revealing Josh. His eyes gleamed with a manic intensity, lips curling into a twisted smile. "Sarah," he whispered, voice low and desperate. "I just wanted to talk." Adrenaline surged through me. I swung the lamp with all my strength, shattering it against his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. I bolted past him, bare feet slamming against the hardwood floor. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted toward the front door. "Help!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. Neighboring porch lights flicked on, cutting through the night. Within moments, the police arrived, dragging Josh away as he muttered my name under his breath like some twisted mantra. That was months ago. Josh is locked away now, but the scars remain. I moved houses, changed my number, tried to rebuild my life. But some nights I still wake up to that suffocating silence. I find myself staring out the window, half expecting to see him lurking among the shadows. Maybe it's just paranoia. Maybe it's the trauma. But sometimes, I swear I see a figure watching from the garden, waiting. Do obsessions ever truly die? Or do they just learn to hide better? The first time I felt it, I thought it was just the cold. I hadn't expected to run into him, Jared. Not after everything, not after how messy the breakup had been. But there he was, standing across the street as I walked toward the cafe, a place I'd always liked to visit for its warm lattes and quiet corners. It had been over a year since I'd seen him. The memories were still fresh, but I thought I'd moved on. I'd even convinced myself that it was for the best. Jared and I had been two people who just didn't belong together, and I'd kept telling myself that. But when he looked over at me with those deep eyes that used to know every part of me, I felt the old ache again. Then I remembered the scarf. The scarf he'd given me for my birthday that year. It was a rich, blood red, almost too bright to be real. The wool was soft, luxurious. He'd wrapped it around my neck with a tenderness I will never forget, whispering that it would keep me safe, keep me warm. I had worn it every day after that, even when it felt too hot for scarves, until one day I noticed the fabric tightening around my throat when I least expected it. It was a strange thing. When I wore it, it felt like it was constricting, slowly choking the breath from my lungs. But whenever I took it off, the sensation would stop. I assumed it was a coincidence, or maybe my mind playing tricks. But after we broke up, I could not bring myself to get rid of it. I still had the scarf. It sat at the back of my closet, a constant reminder of the strangling love I had once shared with Jared. But when I saw him again that afternoon, standing there on the sidewalk, I had an odd feeling, a feeling I could not shake, like the scarf was calling me. As I stepped into the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee swirling in the air, my phone buzzed. I checked it quickly, relieved to see a message from a friend asking me to meet her later. But before I could reply, I felt a cold chill, and the sensation of the scarf around my neck came flooding back. I hadn't even put it on. I looked around the cafe nervously. There was no breeze, no reason for the sudden drop in temperature, but the tightness around my throat grew, slowly at first, and then more forcefully, as though someone, or something, was pulling at it from behind. I gasped for air, my hand flying to my neck. I pulled at the invisible weight, but the pressure only increased. I tried to steady myself, leaning against the counter for support, my vision blurring. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "Are you okay?" The barista's voice cut through the fog, his eyes wide with concern. I nodded, but before I could speak, I saw him, Jared, standing outside the cafe just beyond the large glass window. His face was partially obscured by the glass, but I could see his lips move. His words were muffled, distant. "You can't escape me." The pressure on my neck increased, the choking sensation like something real, like someone's hands around my throat, squeezing tighter, tighter until I could barely breathe. I needed to leave. Now, I rushed outside, but Jared wasn't there. In fact, there was no sign of him anywhere. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the air thick with the taste of fear. But it was the scarf. The damn scarf. I stumbled to the nearest park bench, ripped it from my neck, and threw it onto the grass. I thought for a moment that the suffocating pressure would finally stop, but it didn't. The sensation lingered, an invisible noose tightening around me with every breath. I looked down at the scarf. It was still there, lying innocently in the grass. But there was something different about it now, something alive. The bright red fabric had darkened at the edges, almost as though it had absorbed something from the air, something dark. The sensation of it pulling tighter on my neck only intensified as I stared at it. It was as though the scarf itself was angry. As if it resented being discarded by me, its former owner. I had to get rid of it, once and for all. But when I reached down to pick it up, my fingers hovered above the fabric. I could not touch it. The fear, the dread, the pull, it was too strong. And then, in the distance, I saw him again. Jared, but he wasn't standing in front of me like before. He was walking toward me, his face pale, his eyes wild. And in his hand he held something, the scarf. A sharp chill ran through me as I recognized it. He was holding it, the same blood-red scarf that I had discarded. And the way he held it, like it was an extension of his own body, made my heart race. He was pulling it in my direction as though it were a leash, a tether that could never be broken. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty streets, my lungs burning, but I could feel the scarf pulling, dragging me back as if it was tethered to my soul. Every step I took was heavier, slower, until I stumbled and fell to my knees. My neck was on fire, the burning sensation coursing through my veins, my vision spinning. I could hear him. His voice low and smooth. "You'll never be free, not from me, not from what we shared." And then I felt it, something cold, something wet. The blood-red scarf, now wrapped tightly around my neck again, as if it had never left. It was choking the life out of me. The last thing I saw before the darkness took over was Jared's face, his smile twisted with satisfaction. "You belong to me forever." The first time I heard his voice again, I was staring at my reflection in the dark window. The glass was cold against my palm as I pressed my hand to it, watching the moonlight shimmer across the garden. The night air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and the wind outside rattled the trees, their limbs creaking like bones in an old house. A distant creak echoed through the stillness, and for a brief moment I thought I saw him standing there, just beyond the garden fence. My heart skipped a beat. But no, I blinked and he was gone. Jason was dead. I had seen it with my own eyes, watched as they lowered his casket into the ground, felt the weight of the dirt falling with finality over the box that held his body. I said goodbye. And yet, as I stood there in the half-darkness, my breath fogging the glass, a strange thought began to crawl into my mind. What if I hadn't said goodbye at all? The phone rang, breaking the silence. My pulse quickened, and I felt a chill settle over me. The screen glowed with an unlisted number. I stared at it, my hand hovering over the receiver. I hesitated. The ringing seemed to stretch, growing louder with each passing second, until it felt like it was vibrating through my chest. Something about it felt wrong off. A gnawing feeling crept up my spine, a feeling that made me want to run, to hide from whatever this was. I reached for the phone. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. Silence, thick, heavy. Then, just before I could hang up, a voice crackled through the line. "It's me." My breath caught in my throat. Jason, his voice unmistakable. The air grew colder, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. Distant thunder rumbled across the sky, like the universe itself was shuddering at the impossibility of what was happening. And then nothing. The line went dead. I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear, a cold sweat running down my spine. The world felt like it had tilted just slightly off its axis. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Was I losing my mind? Was this some sort of cruel trick my grief had played on me? 2 months earlier. Jason and I had history, 5 years of love, arguments, promises we couldn't keep. We were like fire and ice, burning with passion one moment, freezing each other out the next. It was inevitable, really. We were always fighting, always breaking, always coming back together like magnets that couldn't help but pull each other in. When it ended, it was messy. Words were said. Things were broken. We stopped talking, went our separate ways. But even then, I never thought it would be forever. I never thought he would be gone so soon. Then came the accident. It was late, too late, and the rain-slicked road was unforgiving. I remember the call from his sister, the way her voice cracked through the phone, carrying the weight of something unspoken. Grief hit me harder than I expected, settling deep in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Guilt twisted around my heart like a knot I couldn't untie. I should have done something, I should have said something, but it was too late. He was gone. A week after the funeral, strange things started happening. At first, I dismissed it. I thought maybe I was just tired, maybe it was just the house settling, but it didn't stop. The TV flickered on by itself, static hissing through the silence of the living room. The lights in the hallway flickered at random, sometimes staying off longer than they should, other times flashing on and off like some faulty wiring. I told myself it was just the wiring, nothing more, but the hair on the back of my neck didn't lie. One night, I was jolted awake by the buzzing of my phone. It was an unlisted number. Half asleep, I answered. "Hello," I murmured, my voice thick with the remnants of sleep. A crackling sound. Then, through the static, a voice, Jason's voice, whispered from the other end of the line. "You left me." My blood ran cold. I sat straight up in bed, clutching the phone tightly. "Jason," I whispered, almost afraid to say his name out loud. Silence. Then the line went dead. The calls came almost every night after that. Sometimes it was just breathing. Slow, deliberate, like someone who had all the time in the world to listen. Other times, he would say things that only Jason could know, private memories, moments we had shared that no one else could possibly remember. He knew things. He shouldn't have known things. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was waiting for me to crack. Friends noticed the dark bags under my eyes, the way I jumped at every creak of the floorboards, at every flicker of light. They told me it was just grief, that I needed therapy. They didn't understand. Grief doesn't make phones ring at 3 a.m. Grief doesn't make your ex's voice fill the air when he's supposed to be dead. One stormy evening, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, save for the flickering candlelight that cast long shadows against the walls. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another unlisted call. I answered it without thinking, the sound of my breath loud in my ears. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice shaky. The voice on the other end was cold, distant, as though it had traveled from miles away. "Come to the basement." A shiver ran down my spine. The words sliced through me like a cold knife. "No," I whispered, but the line was already dead. Against every instinct, I grabbed the flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way down the dark hallway to the basement door. The air felt colder with every step I took, the silence pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the knob. The basement was always dark, always damp, but tonight it felt different. The darkness seemed to stretch, waiting for me to cross the threshold. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The air was thick, heavier than before, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. The flashlight flickered in my hand as I stepped inside. And there he was, Jason. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my legs turning to jelly. "Jason," I whispered, my voice shaking. Tears blurred my vision as I took a step forward. "You're not real," I choked out, the words strangling me. His form wavered, the faint outline of a man trapped in the dark. "You left me." His voice was filled with anguish, his words like a punch to my chest. "I didn't mean to," I sobbed, my knees giving out beneath me. "I'm sorry." The room seemed to constrict, the air thick with sorrow and rage. And then a sudden gust of wind swept through the basement, blowing the shadows away like smoke. Jason's figure began to dissolve, his form fading into nothingness. "I forgive you," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. And just like that, the weight lifted. The basement grew warmer, lighter. The chill that had settled over me faded away, and I felt the tension in the air evaporate. Some nights silence wraps around you like a warm blanket, soft and comforting. But other nights like this, it becomes suffocating. Heavy. A void where every creak, every whisper of wind presses down on your chest, daring you to breathe. The lamp beside my couch flickered faintly, casting nervous shadows across the walls. Outside, rain pattered against the window, rhythmic yet somehow menacing. I curled up with a book, hoping to distract myself from the strange unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. But then my phone rang. The sudden jarring sound cut through the stillness like a knife. The screen glowed, unlisted number. I stared at it, my heart picking up pace. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe it was. Against better judgment, I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence, thick and heavy, then barely audible. Sarah. My breath hitched. That voice. Low, familiar, dripping with malice. It was Mark. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl as if the universe itself recoiled at the impossibility. Mark and I had been together for 3 years. He was charming at first, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order and texted goodnight without fail. But love has a way of blinding you to cracks that eventually shatter everything. When he started tracking my whereabouts, questioning my every move, I knew I had to end it. The breakup wasn't pretty. He begged, raged, and finally promised to leave me alone. But promises from Mark were like smoke, insubstantial and fleeting. The calls started a week after the breakup. At first, it was just heavy breathing. I'd hang up, heart racing, telling myself it was a prank. Then came the messages. I miss you. We need to talk. I blocked every number, but he always found a way. Friends told me to go to the police. I did. They filed a report, but without any direct threat, their hands were tied. One night, after another exhausting day at work, I sank into the couch, hoping for peace. The phone rang again, same unlisted number. I answered, voice sharp. What do you want, Mark? Silence. Then, nice place you got here. My blood turned to ice. What? I whispered. He chuckled softly. I've always liked your basement. A sudden creak echoed from the basement. My heart slammed against my ribs. I glanced toward the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. No, it could not be. Lamp in hand, I crept toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to run. The air grew colder, thicker with dread. I peered down the stairs. Darkness pooled at the bottom like ink. Hello, I called, voice barely a whisper. No answer, just silence. I descended slowly, each step creaking beneath my weight. The basement smelled damp, metallic. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another call. I answered, fear tightening my throat. Where are you? I demanded. Right behind you. I spun around, lamp swinging wildly. Mark stood at the bottom of the stairs, eyes gleaming with a manic light. The lamp crashed to the floor, shattering into shards of glass. He lunged. I scrambled back, heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hand found a rusted pipe on the floor. Desperation fueled my swing. The pipe connected with a sickening thud. Mark collapsed, groaning. I did not wait. I bolted up the stairs, legs trembling, adrenaline surging through my veins. Slamming the door shut, I threw the lock into place, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. 911, what's your emergency? He's in my basement, I gasped. The minutes stretched into an eternity as I waited, every creak of the house amplifying my terror. Finally, red and blue lights flashed through the window. The police stormed in, dragging Mark out in handcuffs. He was laughing, muttering my name like a twisted chant. They found a makeshift bed down there, food wrappers, and a collection of photos, all of me. He'd been living in my basement for weeks, watching, waiting. Mark is gone now, locked away where he can't hurt me. But the fear remains, etched into my bones. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by the moon, makes my heart race. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of my phone ringing, and for a split second, I wonder, what if it's him? What if he's found a way back? Because monsters like Mark never truly disappear. They just learn to hide better. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. My heart skipped a beat, and I groggily glanced at the clock. 3:30 a.m. I nearly dropped the phone when I saw the name on the screen, Ethan. It couldn't be him. He was gone, dead to me after the breakup months ago, and yet there it was. His name. The man I had spent 4 years with, the one who'd left without a trace. The one who never even said goodbye. Hello, my voice trembled as I picked up the call. Nothing but static on the other end. I held my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Then, the faintest whisper came through. Maya, help me. I jerked the phone away from my ear. The call ended abruptly. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold sweat running down my back. My hands shook as I set the phone down on the table, trying to convince myself it was a prank, a bad dream. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I hadn't heard from Ethan since he'd vanished. One day, he simply left. He'd packed his things, walked out the door, and never came back. No explanation, no note, just silence. His absence had broken me in ways I still couldn't explain, and I tried to move on, really, I did. But the thought of him always lingered, like an unanswered question at the back of my mind. The ringing of my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. This time, it wasn't a call, it was a message. I hesitated before opening it. My stomach churned. I recognized the contact name, Ethan. The message read, "Come to the old house. You'll find me there." My breath caught in my throat. My mind raced with confusion. The old house, our house. The one we used to live in before everything fell apart. It had been abandoned for months. I hadn't even thought about it since he left. But something was pulling me, something I couldn't ignore. Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and left my apartment, the cold night air biting at my skin. My car barely made it to the house. It was as though the world was holding its breath, making everything feel impossibly quiet. When I reached the house, a strange stillness enveloped me. The air was thick, heavy. The windows were cracked, the paint peeling from the walls. It had been empty for so long, yet it felt like someone had been waiting here for me all along. As I approached the front door, it swung open. The hinges creaked in a way that made my skin crawl. Inside, the house was dark, save for a flickering light coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the eerie silence. The smell of stale air mixed with something sweeter, like perfume, but old and faded. I moved cautiously, my footsteps slow and deliberate. In the living room, there was a figure sitting in the dim light. I froze. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. It was Ethan. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead, but his body was still. He didn't move as I stepped closer, not even when I called his name. "Ethan," I whispered. My voice trembled, the fear slowly growing inside me. The figure remained silent. But then, his head slowly turned, and he looked directly at me. His lips barely moved when he spoke. "Why did you leave me, Maya?" I felt my breath catch in my throat. His voice was faint, distorted, like a broken recording twisted with static. But it was his voice. It was him. "Ethan, you left. You," I started, my heart racing. His hand twitched, and the light in the room flickered, casting long, sharp shadows across the walls. I took a step back, my body trembling. Suddenly, the room warped. It wasn't like it had been before. It felt wrong, like a glitch in reality. The walls seemed to stretch and contract, and the furniture around me blurred into strange shapes. I couldn't focus. I couldn't breathe. Ethan's figure started to distort too, his features blurring, flickering in and out of existence. No, this isn't real, I thought. But then I blinked, and the room changed again. The shadows grew longer, and Ethan's face was no longer the Ethan I knew. It was someone else, someone unfamiliar. His eyes were black, empty sockets staring at me with something cold and malicious. He stood up suddenly, his movements jerky and unnatural, as though he was a marionette controlled by invisible strings. "You shouldn't have come back." The voice was different now, guttural and deep. My chest tightened in panic. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. I'm stuck in here with him. The world seemed to bend and warp around me, and I lost all sense of time. The house was no longer the house I remembered. The walls pulsated, the floors seemed to shift beneath my feet. The lights flickered erratically. And then in the distance I heard it, the soft echo of my own voice calling out, "Ethan, please help me." But that wasn't me. It was someone else. Someone trapped in this loop of time, desperately pleading for something that could never be answered. Suddenly, I was back in the living room, staring at the figure of Ethan again. His eyes were different now, no longer human. His body had become something else, something twisted. "You never left, Maya," he whispered, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. "You've been here all along with me." I backed away, my heart thumping violently in my chest. My fingers trembled as I reached for the door handle again, but it was stuck. The house seemed to be alive now, a prison that refused to release me. I was stuck in a cycle of time that was unraveling, a reality that was no longer my own. I had come here for him, but in doing so, I had become trapped with him. I was lost. And now there was no escape. The door would never open, and neither would time. I should have known something was wrong when the dreams started. I didn't know it then, but that's where it all began. Her name was Alyssa. We were together for over 3 years. At the time, it felt like we were going to last forever. But life, like everything else, is unpredictable. The breakup came one night, after a fight we both knew had been coming. We hadn't been happy for a while, but I never imagined that ending things would haunt me in ways I couldn't explain. I thought I'd moved on. After the breakup, I threw myself into work, into long nights at the office, anything to keep my mind off of her. But every time I closed my eyes, it was Alyssa's face that I saw. At first, it was just the occasional flash of her smile, the echo of her laughter. That's what I told myself it was, a memory, nothing more. But as the days passed, the dreams became more vivid, more unsettling. Alyssa would appear in them, but she wasn't the way I remembered her. The first dream was simple. We were sitting on the couch in our old apartment, laughing about something silly. I could almost smell the faint scent of her perfume, mixed with the familiar smell of the old leather couch. I could feel the warmth of the room, the hum of the fridge in the background. Everything seemed normal until her smile turned cold, twisted, and her eyes. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't place. I woke up with my heart racing, drenched in sweat. It was just a dream, I told myself, but it didn't stop. Each night, the dreams became darker. Alyssa's face would morph into something grotesque. Her skin would stretch, her smile would widen to an unnatural degree, and her voice would whisper things I didn't want to hear. I couldn't understand it. I hadn't seen her since the breakup. I had deleted her number, erased every trace of her from my life. So why was she still haunting my dreams? I confided in my friend, Matt. He was always the one I went to when things started to feel off. We'd known each other since high school, and he was the only one who knew the full story of my relationship with Alyssa. "Dude, maybe it's just your subconscious," Matt said one night as we sat in a dimly lit bar, the hum of conversation and clinking glasses surrounding us. "You went through something intense, and now your mind's processing it all." But that didn't explain the details of the dreams. The things Alyssa said to me in those dreams were things we never discussed. Her words weren't from our past, they were twisted, like they were pulled from something far darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that she was trying to tell me something. One night, I woke up to a voice calling my name. "James!" I shot up in bed, the room dark and still. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone's I recognized. It was Alyssa's. I turned on the lamp beside my bed, half expecting her to be standing there, but the room was empty. The cold sweat on my skin made me shiver, my breath ragged as I tried to steady myself. The next day, I checked my phone. It was a habit now, a nervous tick to see if there was anything from her, anything that could explain the dream, the voice. There was nothing, nothing at all. That night, I had another dream. But this time, it was different. Alyssa wasn't just in the apartment anymore. She was in the house we used to visit when we were younger, a place out in the woods, an old, dilapidated cabin. The kind of place people forget about, the kind of place that has a history most would rather leave untouched. But in the dream, it was pristine, as though it had never been abandoned. And Alyssa, her face was different this time. Her eyes were hollow, black holes staring back at me. I walked through the cabin, each step creaking beneath my feet. The air was thick with dust, but Alyssa's face was everywhere, on the walls, in the mirror, in the very floorboards beneath my feet. Her face, distorted and twisted, seemed to follow me, her eyes always on me. "James," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. "You'll never escape me. We'll always be together. You can't leave me behind." Suddenly, the walls of the cabin started to close in on me. The air grew heavy, suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My chest felt like it was being crushed by an unseen weight. "Please, Alyssa, stop," I begged, but she only laughed. I woke up, gasping for air, the darkness of the room pressing in on me. My heart was pounding, and for the first time I felt truly afraid. This wasn't just a dream. I was locked in something far beyond that. Alyssa wasn't just a memory. She wasn't just the girl I'd left behind. She was still here. And she wasn't going to let me go. Days blurred into nights. Each dream felt more real than the last. Each night, Alyssa's face haunted me, twisted, angry, and desperate. She would never let me forget. She would never let me leave her. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the cabin in the woods. I don't know why I thought it would help. Maybe I thought if I confronted it, if I went to the place where all the memories were buried, it would stop. But as I walked inside, the air was thick with the same oppressive presence from my dreams. The walls closed in around me, the same suffocating feeling pressing against my chest. I could hear her voice, soft like a whisper in the wind. "James!" And then I saw her. Alyssa standing in the center of the cabin, her face twisted in a grotesque mockery of the girl I once loved. "You're here now," she said, her voice a low, guttural rasp. "You can't escape me, you never will." I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in cement. The walls moved in and the shadows began to swallow me whole. And then I woke up. But this time, something was different. The room was darker, colder. I wasn't in my apartment. I wasn't anywhere familiar. I looked around. The walls were made of wood. The air was thick with dust. I was back in the cabin, and Alyssa was standing right in front of me, smiling. "I told you, James," she whispered. "You'll never leave me." The dream wasn't over. It never was, and I knew then that I was trapped, locked in the past, unable to escape her, forever. It started with a ring, a beautiful antique engagement ring wrapped in velvet and secrets. The kind of thing you'd find in a dusty old shop filled with relics of forgotten lives. But this one was different. Some love stories never truly end. They haunt you, cling to your skin, and twist your fate. Rain drummed steadily against the windows of my dimly lit apartment, the rhythmic tapping filling the silence like a lullaby for the restless. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and the remnants of a burnt-out candle. Shadows stretched long across the room, flickering with each soft sway of the storm outside. I paced across the creaking floorboards, glancing down at the cold, gleaming ring on my finger. Its delicate filigree caught the faint light, but what captivated me most was the way it seemed to shimmer like it was alive, watching me. The unease gnawed at me, a familiar ache that began when Ethan gave me that cursed thing. 2 years earlier, I'd met him in the most mundane way possible, a bookstore aisle filled with second-hand novels and whispers of forgotten stories. He was standing there, thumbing through a dog-eared copy of Dracula, and when he looked up, our eyes locked. His smile was slow, genuine. "That's a good one," he said, tapping the book cover. "I've read it twice already," I admitted, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "Well then," he grinned, "third time's the charm." We fell fast and hard, like characters in one of those whirlwind romances people read about but never actually believe in. He had this charming, thoughtful way about him, and when he looked at me, it felt like I was the only person in the world. A year later, he proposed in that same bookstore aisle with Dracula in his hand and that ring in a velvet box. I thought it was the beginning of our fairy tale. But some stories are cursed from the start. The ring was an heirloom, passed down through generations. Ethan's grandmother was a frail woman with eyes clouded by age and wisdom. "Never wear it after midnight," she warned, her voice low and trembling. "Not unless you want to invite it in." We laughed, dismissing her as an eccentric old woman with too many tailies. Superstitions are for the gullible, right? But then the shadows came. At first, it was subtle, shapes shifting at the edges of my vision, whispers brushing against my ear when no one was there. I convinced myself it was stress. Wedding planning does that, right? Then Ethan changed. His eyes, once warm and full of life, grew hollow. His touch became colder, distant. Sometimes when he spoke, it wasn't his voice at all. It was deeper, darker, like something ancient had slithered into his words. I begged him to take the ring back to his grandmother to destroy it if we had to, but he refused. "It speaks to me," he said one night, staring into the darkness. "It knows things." Desperation drove me to the attic of his grandmother's crumbling estate. The air was thick with dust and decay, the wooden stairs groaning under my weight. Cobwebs clung to the rafters like ancient scars. Among the forgotten relics, I found the truth, a faded journal bound in cracked leather. Its pages detailed the ring's dark history. It was forged in obsession and blood, a binding artifact meant to trap a soul. Those who wore it became vessels for something that was never meant to be. Ethan was already slipping away. The journal described only one way to break the curse, a ritual at midnight under the full moon to sever the bond between wearer and spirit. I returned to the apartment, heart racing. Ethan was there, standing by the window, his silhouette sharp against the stormy night. He turned slowly, eyes gleaming with something that wasn't human. "You don't need to do this," he whispered, his voice laced with malice. "I have to," I said, my voice shaking. He moved toward me, shadows writhing at his feet. "You love me," he hissed. "We can be together forever." "No," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "This isn't love." With trembling hands, I lit the ceremonial fire in the iron brazier. The flames roared to life, casting dancing shadows across the walls. I clutched the ring, its metal searing cold against my skin, and cast it into the fire. The room erupted into chaos. Shadows shrieked, twisting and writhing as ghostly wails filled the air. Ethan screamed, his body contorting as the spirit fought to hold onto him. "I won't let you go," the voice roared. "You already have," I sobbed, forcing myself to watch as the fire consumed the cursed metal. The shadows trembled, shrieking one last time before dissolving into nothingness. Silence fell. Ethan collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. His eyes were clear, filled with confusion and fear. "What happened?" he rasped. "It's over," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's finally over." My name is Charlotte, and I suppose you could say I'm just an ordinary woman trying to make sense of a world that rarely makes sense back. I live in a modest apartment filled with second-hand furniture that I've somehow managed to make my own. I'm a freelance designer, logos, illustrations, and anything else that pays the bills. My days are filled with coffee that's a little too strong, the comforting buzz of background noise from the city outside my window, and the steady hum of my laptop as I work. Life hasn't always been kind, but routine has been my refuge, my way of staying grounded. I've always found solace in routine. It's the anchor that keeps me steady when the chaos of the world threatens to pull me under. Mornings begin with a cup of dark roast coffee, brewed strong enough to jolt my senses awake. I sit by the window of my modest apartment, watching the city slowly come to life. The comforting hum of traffic mixed with the distant chatter of early risers creates a symphony I've grown to depend on. But today is different. The smell hits me first, thick and cloying, like ink but far more metallic. I freeze, closing the door behind me, the sound of the latch echoing through the quiet space. The familiar warmth of my sanctuary has been replaced by an oppressive weight, as if the very air has thickened. I scan the apartment. Everything in place. Books neatly arranged on the shelves, my favorite throw blanket draped over the armrest of the couch, and the desk by the window where I often lose myself in sketches and designs for my freelance projects. But then I see it, the stack of papers on the desk. They weren't there when I left this morning. Neatly arranged, the pages gleam under the dim light of the desk lamp. At first glance, they look like love letters, an archaic tradition I've always found charming, albeit impractical. My breath hitches as I step closer. The scent grows stronger, making my stomach churn. I reach out, my fingers trembling slightly as I pick up the top sheet. The paper's cold. Not just the paper, but the words scrawled across it. Cold like a forgotten grave. My pulse quickens as my eyes scan the text. "Do you remember when we said we'd always be together? You didn't believe me, but you will now." The handwriting is unmistakable Oliver's. His familiar slanted letters and elegant curves stare back at me, each stroke a haunting echo of our past. My chest tightens. It's been 2 months since Oliver disappeared from my life. 2 months since our final confrontation, when I discovered the lies he'd been hiding. He vanished without a word, leaving behind a tangled mess of emotions I'm still trying to unravel. My fingers brush against a crimson streak on the page. Not ink. Blood. Fresh. My breath comes in shallow gasps as I shuffle through the stack of letters. Each one is more disturbing than the last, filled with twisted declarations and unsettling promises. My name is scrawled across each page, binding me to the words in a way that feels suffocating. I drop the papers onto the desk, my heart hammering in my chest. This isn't possible. Oliver's gone. He has to be. The room seems to close in around me, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision. I shake my head, trying to dispel the rising panic. Get a grip, I mutter to myself. It's just a prank, someone's messing with me. But who would do this? And how did they know about Oliver? A sudden creak shatters the silence. I whip around, my breath catching in my throat. The door to my apartment is ajar, swaying gently as though someone had just passed through. Hello, my voice wavers. Silence. I take a tentative step forward, every nerve in my body on high alert. The hallway beyond the door is empty, bathed in the dim glow of the overhead light. Suddenly my phone buzzes in my pocket, the vibration startling me. I fumble for it, hopping for a distraction, maybe a text from a friend or an email that'll pull me back to reality. The message on the screen makes my blood run cold. You can never escape the past, my love. The number is unknown. My fingers tremble as I reread the text, disbelief mingling with terror. This can't be happening, I whisper. The door creaks again, slower this time. The scent of ink and blood grows stronger, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. From the corner of the room, a figure emerges from the shadows. Tall, unmistakable, Oliver. My breath catches in my throat. His eyes are wide and empty black holes that swallow the light. He stands motionless, his presence filling the room with a suffocating weight. No, I whisper, shaking my head. You're not real, you can't be real. But he takes a step toward me, his movements deliberate and unyielding. Crimson stains mark his hands, the same color as the streaks on the letters. I warned you, his voice echoes, not just in the room, but inside my mind, a whisper that burrows deep into my thoughts. I stumble back, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The walls press in, and the floor seems to tilt. My vision blurs as I reach out, desperate for something to hold on to. Stay away, I gasp. Oliver's form twists, his features contorting into something grotesque. His lips curl into a smile that isn't a smile at all, more like a gaping maw filled with darkness. You never appreciated me, did you? But you will now. Forever. My knees buckle, and I fall to the ground, gasping for air. The floor beneath me is slick, cold, and sticky with something that clings to my skin. The room spins, the letters on the desk fluttering as if lifted by an unseen wind. Oliver's laughter fills the space, chilling and endless. You'll never be free of me, he says. You belong to me in life and in death. The words resonate in the air, vibrating in my chest. Darkness closes in around me, pressing against my ribs until I can't breathe. And then, nothing. When I open my eyes, the apartment is silent. Empty. The bloodied letters, the scent, the shadow, they're gone. I push myself up, my body trembling. The light of dawn filters through the window, casting long beams across the floor. But as I step into the living room, my heart sinks. On the floor, just beside the door, is a fresh envelope. The wax seal is crimson, the writing sharp and angular. Oliver. My hands shake as I break the seal, unfolding the crisp paper inside. You'll be seeing me again soon. I should have known better. Should have seen the signs, the whispers, the way the walls seemed to breathe in the stillness of the night. But it was easy to ignore the creeping unease, especially when it came from someone I once loved. Lucas had always been obsessed with architecture, a passion that slowly turned into an obsession, consuming him in a way I couldn't fully understand. He was never satisfied with just creating structures that looked beautiful. He wanted to design buildings that controlled the space around them. He didn't see his creations as mere shelters or works of art. To him, they were legacies, monuments to his ability to shape the world. He often spoke of architecture as if it was the one thing that would outlast him, that would carry on long after he was gone. I couldn't comprehend the weight of his words at the time. I thought it was just another quirk, something to accept as part of his strange, brilliant mind. But now, in this house, in this place, I finally understood what he meant. It had been a year since we broke up. A year of awkward silences and fleeting moments of clarity when I convinced myself I was moving on. A year of trying to forget him, trying to heal the wound he left. But then the invitation arrived. A simple letter, plain and unassuming, delivered to my doorstep. It was an address I didn't recognize and a message that seemed harmless enough. I want you to see it. It's finished. Come by. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling me toward him again, even after everything that had happened. What was I supposed to do? Ignore it? Pretend that a year hadn't passed, that I didn't still think about him, about what we had? I had to see it. The masterpiece he had been working on for so long, this thing that had consumed his thoughts and his time. The thing that had taken him away from me. The address led me to an old part of town, one I hadn't ventured into since we parted ways. The house was tucked away behind overgrown hedges, obscured from view by a thick, damp fog. The smell of aged wood and stone clung to the air, the scent of decay mixing with the earthiness of moss. The house loomed before me like some ancient creature, both familiar and unnervingly foreign. It stood tall, stretching toward the sky, its dark, sharp angles cutting through the mist like a knife. I felt the weight of its presence, its overwhelming stillness. As I stepped out of my car, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet was the only sound that filled the silence. The air seemed to thicken, a tension settling in my chest. The door was slightly ajar. It was as though he had been expecting me. Hesitantly, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the empty hall. "Lucas!" My voice was tentative, trembling slightly as it broke the heavy silence. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breath and the distant hum of the house settling into its own rhythm. The interior was exactly what I had feared. It was as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, long, narrow hallways that twisted in strange directions, the kind of angles that made me feel off balance. The walls themselves seemed to shift and breathe, their shape undulating in a way that made it difficult to focus. But what struck me the most were the details. Photographs, old ones, new ones, lined the walls, captured moments of us in time. Some were of us laughing, others were of us frozen mid-fight, our faces half-lit, expressions caught in those quiet, painful moments. There were so many, each one a reminder of what we once were. A cold shiver ran through me, a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't shake. This wasn't just a house. It was a mausoleum, a monument to the past, to us. It was as if he had built this place for us, for our memories, for our love and our pain. I moved deeper into the house, each step echoing through the vast emptiness. The hallways seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning. Everything about this place was wrong. The space felt alive, watching me, breathing with each movement I made. The temperature dropped as I walked, my breath forming a cloud in the air. And then I found it, the room at the back of the house. A small, dimly lit space with an old chair sitting in the center, the only piece of furniture. Symbols were etched into the walls, strange, unsettling designs that seemed to pulse with energy. And there in the chair sat Lucas. He looked different. His once vibrant face was pale, almost gaunt, his skin stretched tightly over his skull. His eyes were empty. Hollow, there was nothing behind them but darkness. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. His words echoed in the room as if they were bouncing off the walls. "What is this, Lucas?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Why did you invite me here? This house," his voice trailed off as though he were struggling to find the right words. "This house was designed with you in mind. Every corner, every angle, every inch of it, it's all for you. You're a part of it now, you'll always be a part of it." A sickening chill ran through my veins. "What are you talking about? This is insane." "You can't leave," he whispered, his eyes flicking to mine, a strange intensity burning behind them. "You'll never leave, you're already here, forever." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me so violently that I jumped, the sound reverberating through the room. I rushed to the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at my throat. What was happening? I turned back to face Lucas, and my heart stopped. His face, his skin was so pale, stretched thin over his bones. His eyes had turned completely black, pools of nothingness that seemed to swallow the light. And then I heard it. A low, guttural sound that vibrated through the air, a voice but not Lucas's. It was coming from the walls, from the very house itself. "You are mine." My body went cold. I backed away, my legs shaking. The walls, no, the entire room began to twist. The angles of the room started to bend, warping in a way that was completely unnatural. The house was alive, and it was shifting, changing to trap me. The temperature dropped further, ice forming on the windows, frost spreading across the walls like veins. "Why are you doing this?" I screamed, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" "You never understood." Lucas's voice came again, now coming from every direction. It echoed off the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling. This house, this place, it's not just built from wood and stone. It's built from our memories, our love, our pain. Every fight, every kiss, every broken promise, it all lives here. The walls pulsed. It was like they were breathing, moving, shifting with every word he spoke. The house wasn't just a structure, it was a vessel, a living thing that carried everything we had been through. The whispers started then. At first they were soft, faint, but soon they grew louder, more frantic. "You can't escape, you're mine, forever." I ran. I had to get out. But every door I tried led me back to the same room, the same symbols on the walls, the same empty chair. I was trapped. The house was playing tricks on me, warping reality. And then I saw it, the door I had come through, the one that had been open when I first entered. It was sealed shut now, covered in layers of rotting wood. I couldn't get out. I was stuck. The walls closed in on me, and I felt a presence behind me, a weight, cold and heavy, pressing against my chest. I turned around and saw him, Luca's, or something, wearing his face. His breath was cold against my neck, his hands cold as they brushed against my skin. "You should have never come back," he whispered, his voice low and filled with a twisted satisfaction. "I told you this house would never let you go." I should have known better than to ignore the warning signs. But when you've been running from something for so long, you forget what it's like to face it head on. I'd rebuilt my life in a small town, far away from the wreckage Marcus left behind. My name is Claire. I'm not special. I don't think I ever was, not when Marcus and I were together. But I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. I survived the years that followed, years that had been filled with nightmares, self-doubt, and memories of his hands on me, his voice telling me I wasn't good enough. But those years were over, or so I thought. I was sitting in my living room, the faint hum of the old heater keeping the room warm, when the doorbell rang. It was late, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I heard it. My heart pounded, and for a moment I almost did not get up. But I had to check. I peeked through the peephole. A man stood on the other side, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the night. But I would never mistake the deep scar above his lip. I knew that face. It was Marcus. My breath hitched in my throat, and I staggered back. My hands trembled, my mind racing. How? He was dead. I watched him die. The last time I saw him, he was choking on his own blood. I'd thought it was over. He had crossed the line too many times, hurt me in ways no one should ever be hurt. When I left him that night, I knew I was running away from a monster. But somehow he found me again. I almost did not open the door. But something inside me, something darker, something driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, compelled me to turn the knob. When the door swung open, Marcus was standing there, looking like he had stepped out of the grave. "Claire," he said, his voice low and cold, like the wind on a winter night. "It's been too long." I recoiled, stepping back, my breath catching in my throat. I had to be hallucinating. He could not be standing there. Not after everything. You're dead," I whispered, my words barely audible. Marcus did not flinch. He just stepped forward, his face unreadable, his eyes glinting with something dark, something familiar. He was different, yes. He did not look the same as I remembered. His skin had a sickly pallor, like death had kissed him once too many times. His eyes were too hollow, too empty. But it was him, and the air felt thick with his presence. "I've been brought back, Claire," he said, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've been given another chance to finish what I started." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. The memories flashed through me. The fights, the manipulation, the suffocating fear. The last time I'd seen him was when I had escaped. The police had found his body near a creek, a broken neck, blood everywhere. They told me it was an accident, but this could not be real. This could not be happening. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He leaned in, and the smell of decay and something far worse filled the air. It wasn't just the stench of death. It was something ancient, something wrong. "I've come for you, Claire. You thought you could escape, but you can't. Not from me, not from what's ours." I felt the world spin. I wanted to run, to scream, to escape, but my legs refused to move. My mind screamed at me to fight back, but I could not find my voice. "What do you want from me?" I finally managed to ask, my throat dry and tight. "Nothing, Claire," he said, his voice almost too calm. "Except to remind you of what you left behind, of the things we shared, the things you wanted, but did not deserve." He stepped inside without asking, and my heart leaped into my throat as the door clicked shut behind him. I backed away slowly, my thoughts racing for an escape. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I glanced at the window. I could see the lights of the neighboring houses through the blinds, but they felt so far away now, unreachable. Marcus's footsteps were soft but deliberate. He was always like that, quiet, calculating. He knew how to make me feel small, like I was nothing, like I had no voice. He stopped in the middle of my living room, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I could see something like satisfaction flickering behind them. "You look the same," he murmured, his lips curling into a sadistic grin. "But you're not, are you? You're not the girl I left behind. You're not the girl I shaped." My chest tightened, my breath coming faster. He could not be here. This could not be real. "Leave," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm not your property anymore. You can't control me." Marcus tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. "You think I'm here because I want you back," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "I'm not here for that, Claire. I'm here to finish what I started, to make you understand. You belong to me, always have." His words were like poison, sinking deep into my soul. I tried to shake them off, tried to push them aside, but they stuck, clinging to my thoughts. "I'm free of you," I spat. "You can't hurt me anymore." He raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "Is that so?" Then, with a sudden, violent motion, Marcus lunged toward me. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, and I screamed, stumbling backward. But he was too fast. His hands gripped my shoulders, and I felt the coldness of his fingers digging into my skin, like ice. The pressure was suffocating, and I could not breathe. I struggled to get away, but his grip only tightened. I kicked and scratched, but it was like fighting a ghost. "Don't you see?" he whispered into my ear, his voice low and guttural. "I never let you go, Claire, not really." And that's when I knew the truth. I wasn't dealing with the man I had once known. This was something else. Something dark, something unnatural. In one final desperate act, I managed to break free. I shoved him away with all the strength I had, running to the door. I did not look back as I bolted out into the night, into the cold, empty streets. But as I ran, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps following me, and I knew deep down that I could never escape Marcus. Not this time. They say love never dies. I used to think that was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. Now I know better. Sometimes love doesn't fade. It festers. It twists and mutates until it becomes something unrecognizable, something poisonous. And sometimes it kills. I remember when I first met Lily. I thought I had finally found my way out of the darkness. After all the chaos with Ryan, the heartache, the betrayal, the fear, I deserved happiness, didn't I? For the first time in years, I felt the weight lifting from my chest. I could breathe again. Lily was everything Ryan wasn't, everything I needed. She was kind, radiant, like a warm ray of sunlight cutting through the fog. She was calm, soothing in a way that made my scars feel less jagged, my past less suffocating. Her laughter could chase away any shadow, and for the first time in forever, I felt safe. We got married within a year, surrounded by the soft perfume of blooming hydrangeas and the laughter of friends who believed in forever. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, something whole. The kind of story you tell your grandchildren about, but forever doesn't always stay kind. The calls started just a week after the wedding. It was late, past midnight. The kind of hour when the world holds its breath, when everything feels just a little too still. I had just drifted into that half-dream state when the phone buzzed on the nightstand, rattling against the wood, dragging me back to reality. I groaned, half awake, and reached for it. "Hello?" Nothing. Silence, then a breath, slow, deliberate. I froze. A cold shiver ran down my spine, prickling my skin. I cleared my throat. "Hello," I said again, but there was no reply. Only the sound of slow, deliberate breathing on the other end of the line. My heart pounded, and I quickly hung up, my fingers shaking. The silence in the room felt too loud. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, my mind racing. "Probably just a wrong number," I muttered to myself, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, just a glitch, but I knew better. The calls kept coming, always at night. Always silence at first, and then that breathing. Each time, the breath sounded closer, like someone was standing in the room with me, just out of sight. Lily noticed, of course. She saw the way I jumped whenever the phone rang, the way my eyes darted to the windows, the shadows, as if I expected something or someone to be there. One morning over coffee, she suggested, "Let's change the number, maybe it'll stop." So we did. We switched it. We took all the precautions we could, but nothing helped. The calls still came. I began sleeping with the phone turned off, pulling the plug out of the wall, but it did not matter. That's when the flowers started showing up. The first bouquet was beautiful, deep red roses and white lilies, their fragrance thick in the air, tied together with a black ribbon. Lily's face lit up when she saw them. "Who do you think sent these?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. I lied. "No idea." But my stomach twisted with a cold, gnawing dread I could not explain. There was no card, no note, just petals glistening with morning dew, arranged too perfectly to be innocent. I wanted to throw them away, to burn them, to rid myself of the dark feeling that crawled beneath my skin. Lily insisted on keeping them. She placed them in the living room, just beside the window where the sun could touch them. But I could not shake the sensation that they were watching us, waiting for something. By the third bouquet, I felt sick just looking at them. Something was wrong. One evening, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety that had settled in my bones, I found it, a photograph of Ryan and me. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other as if the world could not touch us. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. Ryan's obsessive love, the jealousy, the threats when I left. "If I can't have you, no one will." The words echoed in my mind, his voice dripping with madness. But Ryan was gone. He was dead. He had died in a car accident years ago. That's what I had told myself, what I had convinced myself of to stop the nightmares. But the flowers kept coming, and each bouquet was worse than the last. The black ribbons frayed. The roses wilted. The petals began to brown at the edges, curling up like they were trying to escape something, like they were decaying faster than they should have. The stems began to ooze something thick and red, as if the flowers themselves were bleeding. And the calls, now they weren't just coming from the phone. The phone rang from somewhere else in the house, even when it was unplugged. Lily and I tore the house apart looking for a second phone, but there wasn't one. There was nothing, but the ringing continued. One night I woke to find Lily's side of the bed cold. I reached out, my fingers grazing the empty sheets. "Lily," I whispered, my voice thick with sleep and something darker, something growing in the pit of my stomach. No answer. I called her name again, but the silence pressed in, suffocating. I swung my legs out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed through the house, turning on lights, calling her name. The house was empty. Every room was empty. Panic surged through me, tightening my chest, making it harder to breathe. Then I saw it, the front door wide open. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Leaves tumbled across the porch, swirling in chaotic patterns. And there, lying in the doorway, was a bouquet. Black roses. Dripping with blood, I ran to her. I called her name, my voice rising in desperation, but she was already gone. They found Lily's body hours later. Cold, pale, entwined with thorns as if the roses themselves had claimed her. They said it was a freak accident, some kind of tragic, unexplained event. They called it an accident, but I knew better. Ryan's voice echoed in my mind, louder now, suffocating. "If I can't have you, no one will." I'm still waiting, because love never dies. And sometimes it comes back. As always, thanks for listening. Sleep tight, shadows.